Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. Narrated by Paul Bamer. Red meat. What difference did Stesichorus make? I like the feeling of words doing as they want to do, and as they have to do. Gertrude Stein. He came after Homer, and before Gertrude Stein, a difficult interval for a poet. Born about 650 B.C. on the north coast of Sicily, in a city called Himera, he lived among refugees who spoke a mixed dialect of Chalcidian and Doric. A refugee population is hungry for language and aware that anything can happen. Words bounce. Words, if you let them, will do what they want to do and what they have to do. Stesichorus' words were collected in 26 books, of which there remain to us a dozen or so titles and several collections of fragments. Not much is known about his working life, except the famous story that he was struck blind by Helen, refer to Appendixes A, B, and C. He seems to have had a great popular success. How did the critics regard him? Many ancient praises adhere to his name. Most Homeric of the lyric poets, says Longinus. Makes those old stories new, says Suidas. Driven by a craving for change, says Dionysios of Halicarnassos. What a sweet genius in the use of adjectives, adds Hermogenes. Here we touch the core of the question. What difference did Stesichorus make? A comparison may be useful. When Gertrude Stein had to sum up Picasso, she said, "This one was working." So say of Stesichorus, "This one was making adjectives." What is an adjective? Nouns name the world. Verbs activate the names. Adjectives come from somewhere else. The word adjective, epitheton in Greek, is itself an adjective meaning placed on top, added, appended, imported, foreign. Adjectives seem fairly innocent additions, but look again. These small imported mechanisms are in charge of attaching everything in the world to its place in particularity. They are the latches of being. Of course, there are several different ways to be. In the world of the Homeric epic, for example, being is stable and particularity is set fast in tradition. When Homer mentions blood, blood is black. When women appear, women are neat-ankled or glancing. Poseidon always has the blue eyebrows of Poseidon. God's laughter is unquenchable. Human knees are quick. The sea is unwearying. Death is bad. Cowards' livers are white. Homer's epithets are a fixed diction with which Homer fastens every substance of the world to its aptest attribute, and holds them in place for epic consumption. There is a passion in it, but what kind of passion? Consumption is not a passion for substances, but a passion for the code, says Baudrillard. So into the still surface of this code, Stesichorus was born, and Stesichorus was studying the surface restlessly. It leaned away from him. He went closer. It stopped. Passion for substances seems a good description at that moment. For no reason that anyone can name, Stesichorus began to undo the latches. Stesichorus released being. All the substances in the world went floating up. Suddenly, there was nothing to interfere with horses being hollow-hooved, or a river being root silver, or a child bruiseless, or hell as deep as the sun is high, or Herakles' ordeal strong, or a planet middle night stuck, or an insomniac outside the joy, or killings cream black. Some substances proved more complex. To Helen of Troy, for example, was attached an adjectival tradition of whoredom, already old by the time Homer used it. When Stesichoros unlatched her epithet from Helen, there flowed out such a light as may have blinded him for a moment. This is a big question. The question of the blinding of Stesichoros by Helen refer to Appendixes A, B, although generally regarded as unanswerable, but refer to Appendix C. A more tractable example is Geryon. Geryon is the name of a character in ancient Greek myth about whom Stesichoros wrote a very long lyric poem in dactylo-epitrite meter and triadic structure. Some 84 papyrus fragments and a half-dozen citations survive, which go by the name Geryonius, the Geryon matter, in standard editions. They tell of a strange, winged red monster who lived on an island called Erythia, which is an adjective meaning simply the red place, quietly tending a herd of magical red cattle, until one day the hero Herakles came across the sea and killed him to get the cattle. There were many different ways to tell a story like this. Herakles was an important Greek hero, and the elimination of Geryon constituted one of his celebrated labors. If Stesichoros had been a more conventional poet, he might have taken the point of view of Herakles and framed a thrilling account of the victory of culture over monstrosity. But instead, the extant fragments of Stesichoros's poem offer a tantalizing cross-section of scenes, both proud and pitiful, from Geryon's own experience. We see his red boy's life, and his little dog, a scene of wild appeal from his mother, which breaks off, interspersed shots of Herakles approaching over the sea, a flash of the gods in heaven pointing to Geryon's doom, the battle itself, the moment when everything goes suddenly slow, and Herakles' arrow divides Geryon's skull. We see Herakles kill the little dog with his famous club. But that is enough proemium. You can answer for yourself the question, what difference did Stesichoros make by considering his masterpiece? Some of its principal fragments are below. If you find the text difficult, you are not alone. Time has dealt harshly with Stesichoros. No passage longer than 30 lines is quoted from him, and papyrus scraps, still being found, the most recent fragments were recovered from Carthage in Egypt in 1977, withhold as much as they tell. The whole corpus of the fragments of Stesichoros in the original Greek has been published 13 times so far by different editors, beginning with Berk in 1882. No edition is exactly the same as any other in its contents or its ordering of the contents. Berk says the history of a text is like a long caress. However that may be, the fragments of the Geryonius itself, read as if Stesichoros had composed a substantial narrative poem, then ripped it to pieces and buried the pieces in a box with some song lyrics and lecture notes and scraps of meat. The fragment numbers tell you roughly how the pieces fell out of the box. You can, of course, keep shaking the box. Believe me for meat and for myself, as Gertrude Stein says. Here, shake. Red meat. Fragments of Stesichoros. 1. Geryon. Geryon was a monster. Everything about him was red. put his snout out of the covers in the morning, it was red. How stiff the red landscape, where his cattle scraped against their hobbles in the red wind. Burrowed himself down in the red dawn jelly of Geryon's dream. Geryon's dream began red, then slipped out of the vat and ran. Up sail, broke, silver shot up through his roots like a pup. Secret pup, at the front end of another red day. 2. Meanwhile, he came. Across the salt knobs, it was him. Knew about the home gold, had sighted red smoke above the red spires. 3. Geryon's parents. If you persist in wearing your mask at the supper table, well, good night. Then they said, and drove him up those hemorrhaging stairs to the hot, dry arms, to the ticking red taxi of the incubus. Don't want to go, want to stay downstairs and read. 4. Geryon's death begins. Geryon walked the red length of his mind and answered, no. It was murder, and torn to see the cattle lay. All these darlings, said Geryon, and now me. 5. Geryon's reversible destiny. His mother saw it. Mothers are like that. Trust me, she said, engineer of his softness, you don't have to make up your mind right away. Behind her red right cheek, Geryon could see coil of the hot plate starting to glow. 6. Meanwhile in heaven, Athena was looking down through the floor of the glass-bottomed boat. Athena pointed. Zeus looked him. 7. Geryon's weekend. Later, well later, they left the bar, went back to the centaur's place. The centaur had a cup made out of a skull, holding 3 measures of wine. Holding it, he drank. Come over here, you can bring your drink if you're afraid to come alone. The centaur patted the sofa beside him, reddish-yellow, small, alive animal, not a bee, moved up Geryon's spine on the inside. 8. Geryon's father. A quiet root may know how to holler. He liked to suck words. Here is an almighty one, he would say, after days of standing in the doorway. Nightbull snorted. 9. Geryon's war record. Geryon lay on the ground, covering his ears, the sound of the horses like roses being burned alive. 10. Schooling. In those days, the police were weak. Family was strong. Hand in hand, the first day, Geryon's mother took him to school. She neatened his little red wings and pushed him in through the door. 11. Right. Are there many little boys who think they are a monster? But in my case I am right, said Geryon, to the dog. They were sitting on the bluffs. The dog regarded him joyfully. 12. Wings. Steps off a scraped March sky and sinks up into the blind Atlantic morning, one small red dog jumping across the beach miles below, like a freed shadow. 13. Herakles' killing club. Little Red Dog did not see it. He felt it all. Events carry but one. 14. Herakles' arrow. Arrow means kill. It parted Geryon's skull like a comb, made the boy neck lean at an odd, slow angle sideways, as when a poppy shames itself in a whip of nude breeze. 15. Total things known about Geryon. He loved lightning. He lived on an island. His mother was a nymph of a river that ran to the sea. His father was a gold cutting tool. Old Scholia say that Stesichoros says that Geryon had 6 hands and 6 feet and wings. He was red, and his strange red cattle excited envy. Herakles came and killed him for his cattle. The dog, too. 16. Geryon's end. The red world, and corresponding red breezes, went on. Geryon did not. Appendix A. Testimonia on the question of Stesichoros's blinding by Helen. Suidas S.V. Palinodia. Counter song, or saying the opposite of what you said before. For example, for writing abuse of Helen, Stesichoros was struck blind, but then he wrote for her an encomium and got his sight back. The encomium came out of a dream and is called the Palinode. Isocrates, Helen 64. Looking to demonstrate her own power, Helen made an object lesson of the poet Stesichoros. For the fact is, he began his poem, Helen, with a bit of blasphemy. Then, when he stood up, he found he'd been robbed of his eyes. Straightway, realizing why, he composed the so-called Palinode, and Helen restored him to his own nature. Plato, Phaedrus, 243a. There is in mythology an ancient tactic of purgation for criminals, which Homer did not understand, but Stesichoros did. When Stesichoros found himself blinded for slandering Helen, he did not, like Homer, just stand there bewildered. No, on the contrary, Stesichoros was an intellectual. He recognized the cause and at once sat down to compose his Palinode. Appendix B. The Palinode of Stesichoros, by Stesichoros, fragment 192, Poetae Meliki Graiki. No, it is not the true story. No, you never went on the benched ships. No, you never came to the towers of Troy. Appendix C. Clearing up the question of Stesichoros's blinding by Helen. 1. Either Stesichoros was a blind man or he was not. 2. If Stesichoros was a blind man, either his blindness was a temporary condition or it was permanent. 3. If Stesichoros's blindness was a temporary condition, this condition either had a contingent cause or it had none. 4. If this condition had a contingent cause, that cause was Helen, or the cause was not Helen. 5. If the cause was Helen, Helen had her reasons, or she had none. 6. If Helen had her reasons, the reasons arose out of some remark Stesichoros made, or they did not. 7. If Helen's reasons arose out of some remark Stesichoros made, either it was a strong remark about Helen's sexual misconduct, not to say its unsavory aftermath, the fall of Troy, or it was not. 8. If it was a strong remark about Helen's sexual misconduct, not to say its unsavory aftermath, the fall of Troy, either this remark was a lie, or it was not. 9. If it was not a lie, either we are now in reverse, and by continuing to reason in this way, are likely to arrive back at the beginning of the question of the blinding of Stesichoros, or we are not. 10. If we are now in reverse, and by continuing to reason in this way, are likely to arrive back at the beginning of the question of the blinding of Stesichoros, either we will go along without incident, or we will meet Stesichoros on our way back. 11. If we meet Stesichoros on our way back, either we will keep quiet, or we will look him in the eye and ask him what he thinks of Helen. 12. If we look Stesichoros in the eye and ask him what he thinks of Helen, either he will tell the truth, or he will lie. 13. If Stesichoros lies, either we will know at once that he is lying, or we will be fooled, because now that we are in reverse, the whole landscape looks inside out. 14. If we are fooled, because now that we are in reverse, the whole landscape looks inside out, either we will find that we do not have a single penny on us, or we will call Helen up and tell her the good news. 15. If we call Helen up, either she will sit with her glass of vermouth and let it ring, or she will answer. 16. If she answers, either we will, as they say, leave well enough alone, or we will put Stesichoros on. 17. If we put Stesichoros on, either he will contend that he now sees more clearly than ever before the truth about her whoring, or he will admit he is a liar. 18. If Stesichoros admits he is a liar, either we will melt into the crowd, or we will stay to see how Helen reacts. 19. If we stay to see how Helen reacts, either we will find ourselves pleasantly surprised by her dialectical abilities, or we will be taken downtown by the police for questioning. 20. If we are taken downtown by the police for questioning, either we will be expected, as eyewitnesses, to clear up once and for all the question whether Stesichoros was a blind man or not. 21. If Stesichoros was a blind man, either we will lie, or if not, not. Autobiography of Red. A romance. The reticent volcano keeps his never-slumbering plan, confided are his projects, pink, to no precarious man. If nature will not tell the tale Jehovah told to her, can human nature not survive without a listener? Admonished by her buckled lips, let every babbler be, the only secret people keep is immortality. Emily Dickinson, number 1748. 1. Justice. Geryon learned about justice from his brother quite early. They used to go to school together. Geryon's brother was bigger and older. He walked in front, sometimes broke into a run, or dropped on one knee to pick up a stone. Stones make my brother happy, thought Geryon, and he studied stones as he trotted along behind, so many different kinds of stones, the sober and the uncanny, lying side by side in the red dirt. To stop and imagine the life of each one. Now they were sailing through the air from a happy human arm. What a fate! Geryon hurried on. Arrived at the schoolyard. He was focusing hard on his feet and his steps. Children poured around him, and the intolerable red assault of grass and the smell of grass everywhere was pulling him towards it like a strong sea. He could feel his eyes leaning out of his skull on their little connectors. He had made it to the door. He had to not lose track of his brother. These two things, School was a long brick building on a north-south axis. South, main door through which all boys and girls must enter. North, kindergarten, its large round windows gazing onto the backwoods and surrounded by a hedge of high-bush cranberry. Between main door and kindergarten ran a corridor. To Geryon it was 100,000 miles of thunder tunnels and indoor neon sky slammed open by giants. Hand in hand on the first day of school, Geryon crossed this alien terrain with his mother. Then his brother performed the task day after day. But as September moved into October, an unrest was growing in Geryon's brother. Geryon had always been stupid, but nowadays the look in his eyes made a person feel strange. "Just take me once more, I'll get it this time," Geryon would say. The eyes, terrible holes. "Stupid," said Geryon's brother, and left him. Geryon had no doubt stupid was correct, but when justice is done, the world drops away. He stood on his small red shadow and thought what to do next. Main door rose before him. Perhaps. Peering hard, Geryon made his way through the fires in his mind to where the map should be. In place of a map of the school corridor lay a deep, glowing blank. Geryon's anger was total. The blank caught fire and burned to baseline. Geryon ran. After that, Geryon went to school alone. He did not approach main door at all. Justice is pure. He would make his way around the long brick side wall, past the windows of 7th grade, 4th grade, 2nd grade, and boys, to the north end of the school, and position himself in the bushes outside kindergarten. There he would stand motionless until someone inside noticed and came out to show him the way. He did not gesticulate. He did not knock on the glass. He waited, small, red, and upright. He waited, gripping his new book bag tight in one hand and touching a lucky penny inside his coat pocket with the other, while the first snows of winter floated down on his eyelashes and covered the branches around him and silenced all trace of the world. 2. Each. Like honey is the sleep of the just. When Geryon was little, he loved to sleep, but even more he loved to wake up. He would run outside in his pajamas. Hard morning winds were blowing life-bolts against the sky. Each one blew enough to begin a world of its own. The word each blew towards him and came apart on the wind. Geryon had always had this trouble, a word like each. When he stared at it, would disassemble itself into separate letters and go. A space for its meaning remained there, but blank. The letters themselves could be found hung on branches or furniture in the area. What does each mean? Geryon had asked his mother. She never lied to him. Once she said the meaning. It would stay. She answered, "Each means like you and your brother each have your own room." He clothed himself in this strong word, each. He spelled it at school on the blackboard, perfectly, with a piece of red silk chalk. He thought softly of other words he could keep with him, like beach and screech. Then they moved Geryon into his brother's room. It happened by accident. Geryon's grandmother came to visit and fell off the bus. The doctors put her together again with a big silver pin. Then she and her pin had to lie still in Geryon's room for many months. So began Geryon's nightlife. Before this time, Geryon had not lived nights, just days, and their red intervals. "What's that smell in your room?" asked Geryon. Geryon and his brother were lying in the dark in their bunk beds, Geryon on top. When Geryon moved his arms or legs, the bed springs made an enjoyable ping-shunk, shunk-ping, enclosing him from below like a thick, clean bandage. "There's no smell in my room," said Geryon's brother. "Maybe it's your socks. Or the frog. Did you bring the frog in?" said Geryon. "What smells in here is you, Geryon." Geryon paused. He had a respect for facts. Maybe this was one. Then he heard a different sound from below. Shunk, shunk. Ping, 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 ping. His brother was pulling on his stick, as he did most nights before sleep. "Why do you pull on your stick?" Geryon asked. "None of your business. Let's see yours," said his brother. "No." "Bet you don't have one." Geryon checked. "Yes, I do." "You're so ugly, I bet it fell off." Geryon remained silent. He knew the difference between facts and brother hatred. "Show me yours, and I'll give you something good," said Geryon's brother. "No." "Give you one of my cat's eyes." "No, you won't." "I will. Don't believe you. Promise." Now, Geryon very much wanted a cat's eye. He never could win a cat's eye when he knelt on cold knees on the basement floor to shoot marbles with his brother and his brother's friends. A cat's eye is outranked only by a steely. And so they developed an economy of sex for cat's eyes. "Pulling the stick makes my brother happy," thought Geryon. "Don't tell Mom," said his brother. Voyaging into the rotten ruby of the night became a contest of freedom and bad logic. "Come on, Geryon." "No, you owe me." "No." "I hate you." "I don't care." "I'll tell Mom." "Tell Mom what?" "How nobody likes you at school." Geryon paused. Facts are bigger in the dark. Sometimes, then, he would descend to the other bunk and let his brother do what he liked, or else hang in between with his face pressed into the edge of his own mattress, cold toes bouncing on the bed below. After it was over, his brother's voice got very kind. "You're nice, Geryon. I'll take you swimming tomorrow, okay?" Geryon would climb back up to his bunk, recover his pajama bottoms, and lie on his back. He lay very straight in the fantastic temperatures of the red pulse as it sank away, and he thought about the difference between outside and inside. "Inside is mine," he thought. The next day, Geryon and his brother went to the beach. They swam and practiced belching and ate jam and sand sandwiches on a blanket. Geryon's brother found an American dollar bill and gave it to Geryon. Geryon found a piece of an old war helmet and hid it. That was also the day he began his autobiography. In this work, Geryon set down all inside things, particularly his own heroism and early death, much to the despair of the community. He coolly omitted all outside things. 3. Rhinestones. Geryon straightened and put his hands quick under the table. Not quick enough. "Don't pick at that, Geryon. You'll get it infected. Just leave it alone and let it heal," said his mother, rhinestoning past on her way to the door. She had all her breasts on this evening. Geryon stared in amazement. She looked so brave. He could look at her forever. But now she was at the door. And then she was gone. Geryon felt the walls of the kitchen contract as most of the air in the room swirled after her. He could not breathe. He knew he must not cry. And he knew the sound of the door closing had to be kept out of him. Geryon turned all attention to his inside world. Just then his brother came into the kitchen. "Want to wrestle?" said Geryon's brother. "No," said Geryon. "Why? Just don't. Oh, come on." Geryon's brother picked up the empty tin fruit bowl from the kitchen table and placed it upside down over Geryon's head. "What time is it?" Geryon's voice came muffled from inside the fruit bowl. "Can't tell you," said his brother. "Please, look for yourself. I don't want to. You mean you can't." The fruit bowl was very still. "You're so stupid you can't tell time, can you? How old are you anyway? What a jerk. Can you tie your shoes yet?" The fruit bowl paused. Geryon could in fact tie knots, but not bows. He chose to pass over this distinction. "Yes." Suddenly Geryon's brother stepped behind Geryon and seized him by the neck. "This is the silent death hold. Geryon, in war they use this for knocking out all sentries. With one surprise twist, I can break your neck." They heard the babysitter approaching, and Geryon's brother stepped quickly away. "Is Geryon sulking again?" said the babysitter, entering the kitchen. "No," said the fruit bowl. Geryon very much wanted to keep the babysitter's voice out of him. In fact, he would have preferred not to know her at all. But there was one piece of information he needed to get. "What time is it?" he heard himself ask. "8:15, she answered. "What time will Mom be home?" "Oh, not for hours yet. 11, maybe." At this news, Geryon felt everything in the room hurl itself away from him, towards the rim of the world. Meanwhile, the babysitter continued. "You better start getting ready for bed, Geryon." She was taking the fruit bowl off Geryon's head and moving towards the sink. "Do you want me to read to you? Your mom says you have trouble going to sleep. What do you like to read?" Bits of words drifted past Geryon's brain. Like ash. He knew he would have to let the babysitter go through with this in her wrong voice. She was standing before him now, smiling hard and rummaging in his face with her eyes. "Read the loon book," he said. This was cagey. The loon book was an instruction manual for calling loons. At least it would keep her wrong voice away, from words that belonged to his mother. The babysitter went off happily to find the loon book. A while later, the babysitter and Geryon were sitting on the top bunk calling loons when Geryon's brother surged in and landed on the lower bunk, bouncing everyone up to the ceiling. Geryon drew back against the wall with his knees up as his brother's head appeared. Then the rest of him. He clambered into place beside Geryon. He had a thick rubber band stretched between his thumb and index finger, which he snapped on Geryon's leg. "What's your favorite weapon?" "Mine's the catapult. Blam!" He snapped Geryon's leg again. "You can wipe out the whole downtown with a catapult surprise attack. Blam! Everyone dead, or else fill it with incendiaries like Alexander the Great. He invented the catapult. Alexander the Great, personally. Blam! Stop that!" said the babysitter, grabbing for the rubber band. She missed. Pushing her glasses back up onto her nose, she said, "Garrote. I like the garrote best. It is clean and neat. An Italian invention, I believe, although the word is French." "What's a garrote?" asked Geryon's brother. Taking the rubber band from his thumb, she shoved it in her shirt pocket and said, "A short piece of cord, usually silk, with a slip knot in one end. You put it around someone's neck from behind and pull tight. Cuts off the windpipe. Quick but painful death. No noise, no blood, no bulge in your pocket. Murderers on trains use them." Gerion's brother was regarding her with one eye closed, his mode of total attention. "What about you, Geryon? What's your favorite weapon?" "Cage," said Geryon from behind his knees. "Cage," said his brother. "You idiot! A cage isn't a weapon. It has to do something to be a weapon, has to destroy the enemy." Just then there was a loud noise downstairs. Inside Geryon, something burst into flame. He hit the floor running. "Mom!" 4. Tuesday. Tuesdays were best. Every second Tuesday in winter, Geryon's father and brother went to hockey practice. Geryon and his mother had supper alone. They grinned at each other as night climbed ashore, turned on all the lights, even in rooms they weren't using. Geryon's mother made their favorite meal, cling peaches from the can, and toast, cut into fingers for dipping. Lots of butter on the toast, so a little oil slick floats out on top of the peach juice. They took supper trays into the living room. Geryon's mother sat on the rug with magazines, cigarettes, and telephone. Geryon worked beside her under the lamp. He was gluing a cigarette to a tomato. "Don't pick your lip, Geryon, let it heal." She blew smoke out her nose. As she dialed, "Maria, it's me, can you talk?" "What did he say?" "Just like that?" "Bastard. That's not freedom, it's indifference. Some kind of addict. I'd throw the bum out." "That's melodrama." She stubbed her cigarette hard. "Why not have a nice bath?" "Yes, dear, I know it doesn't matter now." "Geryon?" "Fine. He's right here working on his autobiography." "No, it's a sculpture he doesn't know how to write yet." "Oh, this and that stuff he finds outside. Geryon's always finding things, aren't you, Geryon?" She winked at him over the telephone. He winked back using both eyes and returned to work. He had ripped up some pieces of crispy paper he found in her purse to use for hair and was gluing these to the top of the tomato. Outside the house, a black January wind came flattening down from the top of the sky and hit the windows hard. The lamp flared. "It's beautiful, Geryon," she said, hanging up the telephone. "It's a beautiful sculpture." She put her hand on top of his small, luminous skull as she studied the tomato, and bending, she kissed him once on each eye, then picked up her bowl of peaches from the tray and handed Geryon his. "Maybe next time you could use a $1 bill instead of a 10 for the hair," she said, as they began to eat. 5. Screen door. His mother stood at the ironing board, lighting a cigarette and regarding Geryon. Outside, the dark, pink air was already hot and alive with cries. "Time to go to school," she said for the third time. Her cool voice floated over a pile of fresh tea towels and across the shadowy kitchen to where Geryon stood at the screen door. He would remember when he was past 40 the dusty, almost medieval smell of the screen itself as it pressed its grid onto his face. She was behind him now. "This would be hard for you if you were weak, but you're not weak," she said, and neatened his little red wings and pushed him out the door. 6. Ideas. Eventually, Geryon learned to write. His mother's friend Maria gave him a beautiful notebook from Japan with a fluorescent cover. On the cover, Geryon wrote Autobiography. Inside, he set down the facts. Total facts known about Geryon. Geryon was a monster. Everything about him was red. Geryon lived on an island in the Atlantic called the Red Place. Geryon's mother was a river that runs to the sea, the Red Joy River. Geryon's father was gold. Some say Geryon had 6 hands, 6 feet. Some say wings. Geryon was red, so were his strange red cattle. Herakles came one day, killed Geryon, got the cattle. He followed facts with questions and answers. Questions. Why did Herakles kill Geryon? 1. Just violent. 2. Had to. It was one of his labors. 10th. 3. Got the idea that Geryon was death, otherwise he could live forever. Finally. Geryon had a little red dog. Herakles killed that too. Where does he get his ideas? Said the teacher. It was parent-teacher day at school. They were sitting side by side in tiny desks. Geryon watched his mother pick a fragment of tobacco off her tongue before she said, "Does he ever write anything with a happy ending?" Geryon paused. Then he reached up and carefully disengaged the composition paper from the teacher's hand. Proceeding to the back of the classroom, he sat at his usual desk and took out a pencil. New ending. All over the world the beautiful red breezes went on blowing hand in hand. 7. Change. Somehow Geryon made it to adolescence. Then he met Herakles, and the kingdoms of his life all shifted down a few notches. They were 2 superior eels at the bottom of the tank, and they recognized each other like italics. Geryon was going into the bus depot one Friday night about 3 a.m. to get change to call home. Herakles stepped off the bus from New Mexico, and Geryon came fast around the corner of the platform, and there it was, one of those moments that is the opposite of blindness. The world poured back and forth between their eyes once or twice. Other people, wishing to disembark the bus from New Mexico, were jamming up behind Herakles, who had stopped on the bottom step with his suitcase in one hand, trying to tuck in his shirt with the other. "Do you have change for $1?" Geryon heard Geryon say. "No." Herakles stared straight at Geryon. "But I'll give you a quarter for free." "Why would you do that?" "I believe in being gracious." Some hours later, they were down at the railroad tracks, standing close together by the switchlights. The huge night moved overhead, scattering drops of itself. "You're cold," said Herakles suddenly. "Your hands are cold. Here." He put Geryon's hands inside his shirt. 8. Click. "So who is this new kid you spend all your time with now?" Geryon's mother turned to knock her cigarette ash on the sink, then faced Geryon again. He was seated at the kitchen table, with his camera in front of his face, adjusting the focus. He did not answer. He had recently relinquished speech. His mother continued, "I hear he doesn't go to school. Is he older?" Geryon was focusing the camera on her throat. "Nobody sees him around. Is it true he lives in the trailer park? That where you go at night?" Geryon moved the focal ring from 3 to 3.5 meters. "Maybe I'll just keep talking. And if I say anything intelligent, you can take a picture of it." She inhaled. "I don't trust people who move around only at night." Exhaled. "Yet I trust you. I lie in bed at night, thinking, why didn't I teach the kids something useful? Well," she took a last pull on the cigarette, "you probably know more about sex than I do," and turned to stub it in the sink as he clicked the shutter. A half laugh escaped her. Geryon began to focus again on her mouth. She leaned against the sink in silence for some moments, gazing down the sight line into his lens. Funny, when you were a baby, you were an insomniac. Do you remember that? I'd go into your room at night, and there you were in your crib, lying on your back with your eyes wide open, staring into the dark. You never cried, just stared. You'd lie that way for hours, but if I took you in the TV room, you were asleep in 5 minutes. Geryon's camera swiveled left as his brother came into the kitchen. Going downtown, want to come? Bring some money. The words dropped behind him as he went banging out the screen door. Geryon rose, slowly, closing the shutter release and pushing the camera into the pocket of his jacket. Got your lens cap? She said, as he moved past her. 9. Space and time. Up against another human being, one's own procedures take on definition. Geryon was amazed at himself. He saw Herakles just about every day now. The instant of nature, forming between them, drained every drop from the walls of his life, leaving behind just ghosts, rustling like an old map. He had nothing to say to anyone. He felt loose and shiny. He burned in the presence of his mother. I hardly know you any more, she said, leaning against the doorway of his room. It had rained suddenly at supper time. Now sunset was startling drops at the window. Stale peace of old bedtimes filled the room. Love does not make me gentle or kind, thought Geryon, as he and his mother eyed each other from opposite shores of the light. He was filling his pockets with money, keys, film. She tapped a cigarette on the back of her hand. I put some clean T-shirts in your top drawer this afternoon, she said. Her voice drew a circle around all the years he had spent in this room. Geryon glanced down. This one is clean, he said. It's supposed to look this way. The T-shirt was ripped here and there. God loves Lola, in red letters. Glad she can't see the back, he thought, as he shrugged on his jacket and stuck the camera in the pocket. What time will you be home? She said. Not too late, he answered. A pure, bold longing to be gone filled him. So, Geryon, what do you like about this guy, this Herakles? Can you tell me? Can I tell you? Thought Geryon. 1,000 things he could not tell flowed over his mind. Herakles knows a lot about art. We have good discussions. She was looking not at him, but past him, as she stored the unlit cigarette in her front shirt pocket. How does distance look? Is a simple, direct question. It extends from a spaceless within to the edge of what can be loved. It depends on light. Light that for you? He said, pulling a book of matches out of his jeans as he came towards her. No thanks, dear. She was turning away. I really should quit. 10. Sex question. Is it a question? I better be getting home. Okay. They continued to sit. They were parked out on the highway, cold night smell coming in the windows, new moon floating white as a rib at the edge of the sky. I guess I'm someone who will never be satisfied, said Herakles. Geryon felt all nerves in him move to the surface of his body. What do you mean, satisfied? Just satisfied. I don't know. From far down the freeway came a sound of fishhooks scraping the bottom of the world. You know. Satisfied. Geryon was thinking hard. Fires twisted through him. He picked his way carefully toward the sex question. Why is it a question? He understood that people need acts of attention from one another. Does it really matter which acts? He was 14. Sex is a way of getting to know someone. Herakles had said he was 16. Hot, unsorted parts of the question were licking up from every crack in Geryon. He beat at them as a nervous laugh escaped him. Herakles looked suddenly quiet. "It's okay," said Herakles. His voice washed Geryon open. "Tell me," said Geryon. And he intended to ask him, do people who like sex have a question about it too? But the words came out wrong. Is it true you think about sex every day? Herakles' body stiffened. That isn't a question, it's an accusation. Something black and heavy dropped between them, like a smell of velvet. Herakles switched on the ignition, and they jumped forward onto the back of the night, not touching, but joined in astonishment as two cuts lie parallel in the same flesh. 11. Hades. Sometimes a journey makes itself necessary. Spirit rules secretly alone. The body achieves nothing, is something you know instinctively at 14 and can still remember even with hell in your head at 16. They painted this truth on the long wall of the high school the night before departing for Hades. Herakles' hometown of Hades lay at the other end of the island, about 4 hours by car, a town of moderate size and little importance, except for one thing. "Have you ever seen a volcano?" said Herakles, staring at him. Geryon felt his soul move in his side. Then Geryon wrote a note full of lies for his mother and stuck it on the fridge. They climbed into Herakles' car and set off westward. Cold, green summer night. Active? The volcano? Yes, the last time she blew was 1923, threw 180 cubic kilometers of rock into the air, covered the countryside with fire, overturned 16 ships in the bay. My grandmother says the temperature of the air rose to 700 degrees centigrade downtown. Caskets of whiskey and rum burst into flame on the main street. She saw it erupt, watched from the roof, took a photograph of it. 3 p.m. Looks like midnight. What happened to the town? Cooked. There was a survivor, prisoner in the local jail. Wonder what happened to him. You'll have to ask my grandmother about that. It's her favorite story. Lava Man. Lava Man? Herakles grinned at Geryon as they shot onto the freeway. You're going to love my family. 12. Lava. He did not know how long he had been asleep. Black, central, stalled night. He lay hot and motionless. That is, motion was a memory he could not recover, among others, from the bottom of the vast blind kitchen where he was buried. He could feel the house of sleepers around him like loaves on shelves. There was a steady, rushing sound, perhaps an electric fan down the hall, and a fragment of human voice tore itself out and came past. It seemed already long ago, trailing a bad dust of its dream which touched his skin. He thought of women. What is it like to be a woman? listening in the dark. Black mantle of silence stretches between them like geothermal pressure. Ascent of the rapist up the stairs seems as slow as lava. She listens to the blank space where his consciousness is moving towards her. Lava can move as slow as 9 hours per inch. Color and fluidity vary with its temperature from dark red and hard, below 1,800 degrees centigrade, to brilliant yellow and completely fluid, above 1,950 degrees centigrade. She wonders if he is listening too. The cruel thing is, she falls asleep listening. 13. Somnambula. Geryon awoke too fast and felt his box contract. Hot pressure morning. House full of tumbling humans and their languages. Where am I? Voices from somewhere. He made his way thickly downstairs and through the house to the back porch, huge and shadowy as a stage facing onto brilliant day. Geryon squinted. Grass swam towards him and away, joyous small companies of insects with double-decker wings like fighter planes were diving about in the hot, white wind. The light unbalanced him. He sat down quickly on the top step, saw Herakles stretched on the grass, making sleepy talk. "My world is very slow right now," Herakles was saying. His grandmother sat at the picnic table, eating toast and discussing death. She told of her brother who was conscious to the end but could not speak. His eyes watched the tubes they were putting in and pulling out of him, so they explained each one. "Now we are inserting sap of the Queen of the Night. You will feel a pinch, then a black flow," said Herakles, in his sleepy voice that no one was listening to. A big red butterfly went past, riding on a little black one. "How nice," said Geryon. "He's helping him." Herakles opened one eye and looked. "He's fucking him." "Herakles," said his grandmother. He closed his eyes. "My heart aches when I am bad." Then he looked at Geryon and smiled. "Can I show you our volcano?" 14. Red Patience. Geryon did not know why he found the photograph disturbing. She had taken it herself, standing on the roof of the house that afternoon in 1923, with a box camera. Red Patience. A 15-minute exposure that recorded both the general shape of the cone, with its surroundings, best seen by day, and the rain of incandescent bombs tossed into the air and rolling down its slopes. Visible in the dark. Bombs had shot through the vent at velocities of more than 300 kilometers an hour, she told him. The cone itself rose 1,000 meters above the original cornfield and erupted about 1,000,000 tons of ash, cinder, and bombs during its early months. Lava followed for 29 months. Across the bottom of the photograph, Geryon could see a row of pine skeletons, killed by falling ash. Red Patience. A photograph that has compressed on its motionless surface 15 different moments of time, 900 seconds of bombs moving up and ash moving down, and pines in the kill process. Geryon did not know why. He kept going back to it. It was not that he found it an especially pleasing photograph. It was not that he did not understand how such photographs are made. He kept going back to it. What if you took a 15-minute exposure of a man in jail Let's say the lava has just reached his window. He asked. I think you are confusing subject and object, she said. Very likely, said Geryon. 15. Pair. These days, Geryon was experiencing a pain not felt since childhood. His wings were struggling. They tore against each other on his shoulders like the little mindless red animals they were. With a piece of wooden plank he'd found in the basement, Geryon made a back brace and lashed the wings tight. Then put his jacket back on. You seem moody today, Geryon. Anything wrong? Said Herakles when he saw Geryon coming up the basement stairs. His voice had an edge. He liked to see Geryon happy. Geryon felt his wings turn in and in and in. Nope, just fine. Geryon smiled hard with half of his face. So, tomorrow, Geryon. Tomorrow? Tomorrow we'll take the car and drive out to the volcano. You'll like that. Yes. Get some photographs. Geryon sat down suddenly. And tonight? Geryon? You okay? Yes, fine. I'm listening. Tonight? Why do you have your jacket over your head? Can't hear you, Geryon. The jacket shifted. Geryon peered out. I said, sometimes I need a little privacy. Herakles was watching him, his eyes still as a pond. They watched each other, this odd pair. 16. Grooming. As in childhood, we live sweeping close to the sky, and now, what dawn is this? Herakles lies like a piece of torn silk in the heat of the blue, saying, Geryon, please. The break in his voice made Geryon think for some reason of going into a barn, first thing in the morning, when sunlight strikes a bale of raw hay still wet from the night. Put your mouth on it, Geryon, please. Geryon did. It tasted sweet enough. I am learning a lot in this year of my life, thought Geryon. It tasted very young. Geryon felt clear and powerful, not some wounded angel after all, but a magnetic person like Matisse or Charlie Parker. Afterwards they lay kissing for a long time, then played gorillas. Got hungry. Soon they were sitting in a booth at the bus depot, waiting for food. They had started to practice their song, Joy to the World, when Herakles pulled Geryon's head into his lap and began grooming for knits. Gorilla grunts mingled with breakfast sounds in the busy room. The waitress arrived, holding 2 plates of eggs. Geryon gazed up at her from under Herakles' arm. Newlyweds? She said. 17. Walls. That night, they went out painting. Geryon did an early red-winged love slave on the garage of the priest's house next to the Catholic church. Then, passing down Main Street, they saw fat white letters, recent, on the side of the post office. Capitalism sucks. Herakles eyed the paint supply dubiously. Well, he parked in the alley. After crossing out the white letters, neatly with a bar of opaque black, he encircled it in an airy red cloud of chancery script. Cut here. He was quiet as they got back into the car. Then down the tunnel to the on-ramp for the freeway. Geryon was bored and said he couldn't see any good spaces left, got out his camera and went off toward the sound of traffic. Up on the overpass, the night was wide open, and blowing headlights like a sea. He stood against the wind and let it peel him clean. Back at the tunnel, Herakles had finished printing his 7 personal precepts in vertical black and red over a fading, stenciled, "Leave the walls alone," and was down on one knee, scraping the brush on the edge of the can. He did not look up, but said, "There's some paint left. Another love slave? No, let's do something cheerful. All your designs are about captivity. It depresses me." Geryon watched the top of Herakles' head and felt his limits returning. Nothing to say. Nothing. He looked at this fact in mild surprise. Once, in childhood, his ice cream had been eaten by a dog, just an empty cone in a small, dramatic red fist. Herakles stood up. "No? Let's go then." On the way home they tried, "Joy to the world," but were too tired. It seemed a long drive. 18. She. Back at the house, all was dark except a light from the porch. Herakles went to see. Geryon had a thought to call home and ran upstairs. "You can use the phone in my mother's room. Top of the stairs. Turn left." Herakles called after him. But when he reached the room, he stopped in a night gone suddenly solid. Who am I? He had been here before in the dark, on the stairs, with his hands out, groping for a switch. He hit it, and the room sprang towards him like an angry surf with its unappeasable debris of woman liquors. He saw a slip, a dropped magazine, combs, baby powder, a stack of phone books, a bowl of pearls, a teacup with water in it, himself in the mirror, cruel as a slash of lipstick. He banged the light off. He had been here before, dangling inside the word "she," like a trinket at a bell. Spokes of red rang across his eyelids in the blackness. As he made his way downstairs again, Geryon could hear the grandmother's voice. She was sitting on the porch swing with her hands in her lap and her small feet dangling. A rectangle of light fell across the porch from the kitchen door and just touched her hem. Herakles lay flat on his back on top of the picnic table, both arms across his face. The grandmother watched Geryon cross the porch and sit down between them in a deck chair without interrupting her sentence. "This idea that your lungs will explode if you can't reach the surface." "Lungs don't explode. They collapse without oxygen. I have it from Virginia Woolf, who once spoke to me at a party, not, of course, about drowning, of which she had no idea yet. Have I told you this story before? I remember the sky behind her was purple. She came towards me, saying, 'Why are you alone in this huge blank garden, like a piece of electricity?' Electricity? Maybe she said cakes and tea. True, we were drinking gin. It was long past tea time, but she was a highly original woman. I was praying God, let it have been cakes and tea. I'll tell her my anecdote of Buenos Aires. Those Argentines, so crazy for tea every day at 5, the little cups. But she drifted away, the little translucent cups, like bones, you know. In Buenos Aires I had a small dog, but I see by your face I am wandering." Geryon jumped. "No, ma'am!" he yelled, as the deck chair gouged him. "Gift from Freud. But that is another story." "Yes, ma'am." "He drowned, not Freud, the dog, and Freud made a joke. It was not a funny joke having to do with incomplete transference. I cannot recall the German wording. The German weather, however, I remember exactly." "What was the weather, ma'am?" "Cold and moonlit." "You met with Freud at night?" "Only in summer." The phone rang, and Herakles fell off the table, then ran to answer it. July moon shadows stood motionless on the grass. Geryon watched, a presence soaking out of them. What was I saying? Oh, yes, Freud, reality, is a web, Freud used to say. Ma'am? Yes? Can I ask you something? Certainly. I want to know about Lava Man. Ah. I want to know what he was like. He was badly burned, but he didn't die? Not in the jail. And then what? And then he joined with Barnum. You know, the Barnum Circus. He toured the United States, made a lot of money. I saw the show in Mexico City when I was 12. Was it a good show? Pretty good, Freud would have called it. Unconscious metaphysics. But at 12 I was not cynical. I had a good time. So what did he do? He gave out souvenir pumice and showed where the incandescence had brushed him. I am a drop of gold, he would say. I am molten matter returned from the core of earth to tell you interior things. Look! He would prick his thumb and press out ochre-colored drops that sizzled when they hit the plate. Volcano blood! Claimed the temperature of his body was a continuous 130 degrees and let people touch his skin for 75 cents. At the back of the tent. So you touched him? She paused. Let's say... Herakles bounded in. It's your mom. She's finished yelling at me. Now she wants to talk to you. 19. From the archaic to the fast self. Reality is a sound. You have to tune into it, not just keep yelling. He woke fast from a loud, wild dream that vanished at once and lay listening to the splendid, subtle ravines of Hades, where hard-working dawn monkeys were wheedling and baiting one another up and down the mahogany trees. The cries took little nicks out of him. This was when Geryon liked to plan his autobiography in that blurred state, between awake and asleep, when too many intake valves are open in the soul, like the terrestrial crust of the earth, which is proportionately 10 times thinner than an eggshell. The skin of the soul is a miracle of mutual pressures. Millions of kilograms of force pounding up from Earth's core on the inside to meet the cold air of the world and stop, as we do, just in time. The autobiography, which Geryon worked on from the age of 5 to the age of 44, had recently taken the form of a photographic essay. Now that I am a man in transition, thought Geryon, using a phrase he'd learned from... Door hit the wall as Herakles kicked it open and entered carrying a tray with 2 cups and 3 bananas. Room service, said Herakles, looking around for a place to set the tray down. Geryon had moved all the furniture up against the walls of the room. Oh, good, said Geryon. Coffee. No, it's tea, said Herakles. My grandmother is in Argentina again today. He handed Geryon a banana. She was just telling me about the electricians. You know you have to pass an examination to get into the electricians' union in Buenos Aires. But all the exam questions are about the Constitution. What do you mean? The human Constitution? No, the Constitution of Argentina. Except the last one. The last Constitution? No, the last question on the exam. Guess what it is. You'll never guess. Guess. No, come on. No, I hate guessing. Just one guess. Come on, Geryon, just one. What time of day did Krakatoa erupt? Great question, but no. He paused. Give up? Geryon looked at him. What is the Holy Ghost? That's it? That's it. What is the Holy Ghost? A truly electrical question, as my grandmother put it. Herakles was sitting on the floor beside the bed. He drained his teacup and regarded Geryon. So what time of day did Krakatoa erupt? 4 a.m., Geryon said, pulling the quilt high up under his chin. The noise awakened sleepers in Australia 3,000 kilometers away. No kidding? How do you know that? Geryon had found the Encyclopedia Britannica 1911 edition in the basement and read the volcano article. Should he admit this? Yes. Encyclopedia. Herakles peeled a banana. He seemed to be thinking. So your mom was pretty angry last night? Geryon said, yes. Herakles ate half his banana. He ate the other half. So what do you think? What do you mean, what do I think? Herakles placed his banana peel on the tray and straightened the parts of it carefully. Think you should be getting back? Geryon was chewing a mouthful of banana and didn't quite hear. This sentence is important for you, said a little lulled voice inside. What? I said there's a bus every morning at 9 or so. Geryon was trying to breathe, but a red wall had sliced the air in half. And what about you? Oh, I'll be staying around here. I guess my grandmother wants the house painted, said she'd pay me. I can probably get a couple guys from town to help. Geryon was thinking hard. Flames licked along the floorboards inside him. I am quite a good painter myself, he said. But the word good cracked in half. Herakles watched him. Geryon, you know, we'll always be friends. Geryon's heart and lungs were a black crust. He had a sudden, strong desire to go to sleep. Herakles slid to his feet, smooth as a monkey. Hurry up and get dressed, Geryon. We're going to show you a volcano today. I'll be on the porch. My grandmother wants to come too. In Geryon's autobiography, this page has a photograph of some red rabbit giggle tied with a white ribbon. He has titled it, Jealous of My Little Sensations. 20. A.A. Geryon fell asleep 7 or 8 times on the way to the volcano. The other two were talking about feminism, then life in Hades, then unstable bitumen. Or was that from Britannica? All the sentences mixed around in Geryon's drifting, drowsing head. Men had to be taught to hate women for foot massage pumice and ballast on railroad. Sure, they know how eruption takes place. His little elementary courtesies darting out like a tongue. But how can I talk to people who I don't know? The European experience. Now, jolted awake, Geryon glanced out. The world had gone black and bulbous. Shiny ropes of old lava rose and fell in every direction around the car, which had come to a halt. Most volcanic rock is basalt. If it is dark and blocky, that means very little silica in the composition, so the Encyclopedia Britannica. Very little silica in the composition, said Geryon as he climbed out. Then the rock silenced him. It pitched away on all sides, utterly blank except for one crazed blackish unit of intraplate light bouncing from rock to rock, as if looking for lost kin. Geryon put his foot out to take a step. The lava emitted a glassy squeak, and he jumped. Careful, said Herakles' grandmother. Herakles had lifted her out of the back seat. Now she stood leaning on his arm. The lava dome here is more than 90% glass. Rhyolite obsidian, they call it. I find it very beautiful, has a kind of pulse as you look at it. She began to move forward with a tinkling sound over the black billows. They say the reason for all these blocks and rubble on top is strains produced when the glass chills so rapidly. She made a little sound. Reminds me of my marriage. She stumbled then, and Geryon caught her other arm. It was like a handful of autumn. He felt huge and wrong. When is it polite to let go someone's arm after you grab it? Just for an instant, balancing on the vitreous surface, he went to sleep and awoke, still gripping her arm. Herakles was saying, in crossword puzzles, it's the word for blocky lava in Hawaiian. How do you spell it? Just like it sounds. A-A. Geryon dozed off, awoke again. They were in the car, already driving away from the terrible rocks. Up front, Herakles and his grandmother had begun Joy to the World in harmony. 21. Memory Burn. Herakles and Geryon had gone to the video store. Full moon sends rapid clouds dashing past a cold sky. When they came back, they were arguing. It's not the photograph that disturbs you. It's you don't understand what photography is. Photography is disturbing, said Geryon. Photography is a way of playing with perceptual relationships. Well, exactly. But you don't need a camera to tell you that. What about stars? Are you going to tell me none of the stars are really there? Well, some of them are there, but some burned out 10,000 years ago. I don't believe that. How can you not believe it? It's a known fact. But I see them. You see memories. Have we had this conversation before? Geryon followed Herakles to the back porch. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa. Do you know how far away some of those stars are? Just don't believe it. Let's see someone touch a star and not get burned. He'll hold up his finger. Just a memory burn, he'll say. Then I'll believe it. Okay, never mind stars. What about sound? You've watched a man chop wood in a forest. No, I do not watch men in forests. I give up. That would be very cold. What? That would be very cold, repeated the grandmother from the porch swing. Watching men in forests? A memory burn. Ah, she's right. Yes, she is. She had a lung burn once, and that was cold, and don't call me she when I'm right here. Sorry. You got a lung burn in Hades? No, it was in the Pyrenees. I burned my lungs. I had gone to St. Croix to photograph skiers. That would be the Winter Olympics, 1936. Grushenk was competing. Do you know Grushenk? Well, never mind. He was very fast. I sold a photograph of him in his extraordinary scarlet ski pants to Life magazine for $1,000. That was a handsome sum in 1936. Don't be patronizing. It's still a handsome sum for a photograph. Herakles' father. She waved her hand towards the sofa, but Herakles had gone back in the house. Give me less than half that for Red Patience. You took a look at Red Patience, didn't you? I wish he hadn't hung it in the kitchen. Much too dark in there. People think it's a black and white photograph. Of course, nobody knows how to look at a photograph nowadays. No, I saw the lava. Is it lava? Of course, yes. You mean at the top of the cone. No, I mean at the bottom. Of the picture on the trunk of one of the pine trees, little red drops like blood. Ah, yes. Very good, the little red drops. My signature. It's a disturbing photograph. Yes, but why? Gaiety transfiguring all that dread. Who said that? Yeats? Where did Yeats see a volcano? I believe he was talking about politics. No, I don't think that's what I mean. Do you mean the silence? But all photographs are silent. Don't be facile. You might as well say all mothers are women. Well, aren't they? Of course. But that tells you nothing. Question is how they use it, given the limits of the form. Does your mother live on the island? I don't want to talk about my mother. Ah, well. Silence, then. Herakles came out the door from the kitchen, climbed over the back of the sofa, and subsided into it lengthwise. Your grandmother has been teaching me the value of silence, said Geryon. I bet, said Herakles. He turned to her. It's late, Gram. Don't you want to go to bed? Can't sleep, Angel. she said. "Is your leg paining? I can rub your ankles. Come, I'll take you up." Herakles was standing in front of her, and he lifted her towards him like snow. Geryon saw her legs were asymmetrical, one pointed up, the other down and back. "Good night, children," she called in her voice like old coals. "May God favor you with dreams." 22. Fruit Bowl. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table when Geryon opened the screen door. He had taken the local bus from Hades, 7-hour trip. He wept most of the way. Wanted to go straight to his room and shut the door. But when he saw her, he sat down, hands in his jacket. She smoked in silence a moment, then rested her chin against her hand, eyes on his chest. "Nice T-shirt," she said. It was a red singlet with white letters that read, "Tender Loin." Herakles gave it. And here Geryon had meant to slide past the name coolly, but such a cloud of agony poured up his soul he couldn't remember what he was saying. He sat forward. She exhaled. She was watching his hands, so he unclenched them from the edge of the table and began spinning the fruit bowl slowly. He spun it clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. Why is this fruit bowl always here? He stopped and held it by the rims. It's always here, and it never has any fruit in it. Been here all my life, never had fruit in it yet. Doesn't that bother you? How do we even know it's a fruit bowl? She regarded him through smoke. How do you think it feels growing up in a house full of empty fruit bowls? His voice was high. His eyes met hers, and they began to laugh. They laughed until tears ran down. Then they sat quiet, drifted back to opposite walls. They spoke of a number of things: laundry, Geryon's brother doing drugs, the light in the bathroom. At one point she took out a cigarette, looked at it, put it back. Geryon laid his head on his arm on the table. He was very sleepy. Finally they rose and went their ways. The fruit bowl stayed there. Yes, empty. 23. Water. Water! Out from between two crouching masses of the world, the word leapt. It was raining on his face. He forgot, for a moment, that he was a broken heart. Then he remembered, sick lurch, downward to Geryon, trapped in his own bad apple. Each morning a shock to return to the cut soul. Pulling himself onto the edge of the bed, he stared at the dull amplitude of rain. Buckets of water sloshed from sky to roof, to eave, to windowsill. He watched it hit his feet and puddle on the floor. He could hear bits of human voice streaming down the drain pipe. "I believe in being gracious." He slammed the window shut. Below, in the living room, everything was motionless. Drapes closed, chairs asleep. Huge wads of silence stuffed the air. He was staring around for the dog, then realized they hadn't had a dog for years. Clock in the kitchen said 6:15. He stood looking at it, willing himself not to blink until the big hand bumped over to the next minute. Years passed as his eyes ran water, and 1,000 ideas jumped his brain. If the world ends now, I am free, and if the world ends now, no one will see my autobiography. Finally, it bumped. He had a flash of Herakles' sleeping house, and put that away. Got out the coffee can, turned on the tap, and started to cry. Outside, the natural world was enjoying a moment of total strength. Wind rushed over the ground like a sea and battered up into the corners of the buildings. Garbage cans went dashing down the alley after their souls. Giant ribs of rain shifted open on a flash of light and cracked together again, making the kitchen clock bump crazily. Somewhere a door slammed. Leaves tore past the window. Weak as a fly, Geryon crouched against the sink with his fist in his mouth and his wings trailing over the drain board. Rain, lashing the kitchen window, sent another phrase of Herakles chasing across his mind. A photograph is just a bunch of light hitting a plate. Geryon wiped his face with his wings and went out to the living room to look for the camera. When he stepped onto the back porch, rain was funneling down off the roof in a morning as dark as night. He had the camera wrapped in a sweatshirt. The photograph is titled, "If he sleep, he shall do well." It shows a fly floating in a pail of water, drowned, but with a strange agitation of light around the wings. Geryon used a 15-minute exposure. When he first opened the shutter, the fly seemed to be still alive. 24. Freedom. Geryon's life entered a numb time, caught between the tongue and the taste. He got a job in the local library, shelving government documents. It was agreeable to work in a basement, humming with fluorescent tubes and cold as a sea of stone. The documents had a forlorn austerity, tall and hushed in their ranges as veterans of a forgotten war. Whenever a librarian came clumping down the metal stairs with a pink slip for one of the documents, Geryon would vanish into the stacks. A little button at the end of each range activated the fluorescent track above it. A yellowing 5x7 index card, scotch-taped below each button, said, "Extinguish light when not in use." Geryon went flickering through the ranges like a bit of mercury, flipping the switches on and off. The librarians thought him a talented boy with a shadow side. One evening at supper, when his mother asked him what they were like, Geryon could not remember if the librarians were men or women. He had taken a number of careful photographs, but these showed only the shoes and socks of each person. "They look like mostly men's shoes to me," said his mother, bending over the prints, which he had spread on the kitchen table. "Except, who's that?" She pointed. It was a photograph taken from floor level of a single naked foot propped on the open drawer of a metal file cabinet. On the floor beneath lay a dirty red Converse sneaker on its side. "That's the assistant head librarian's sister." He pulled forward a photo of white acrylic socks and dark loafers crossed at the ankle. "Assistant head librarian. She comes in at 5 sometimes to get a ride home with him." Geryon's mother looked closer. "What does she do?" "Works at Dunkin' Donuts, I think." "Nice girl?" "No." "Yes. I don't know." Geryon glared. His mother reached out a hand to touch his head, but he ducked sideways and began gathering up the photographs. The phone rang. "Can you get that?" she said, turning to the sink. Geryon went into the living room and stood looking down at the phone. As it rang, a third time, and a fourth. "Hello, Geryon? Hi, it's me. You sound funny. Were you asleep?" Herakles' voice went bouncing through Geryon on hot gold springs. "Oh, no, I wasn't." "So how are things? What are you up to?" "Oh—" Geryon sat down hard on the rug. Fire was closing off his lungs. "Not much. You?" "Oh, the usual. You know, this and that. Did some good painting last night with Hart." "Hart? I guess you didn't meet Hart when you were here. He came over from the mainland last Saturday. Or was it Friday? No, Saturday. Hart is a boxer. Says he might train me to be his cornerman." "Really?" "A good cornerman can make the difference, Hart says." "Does he?" "Muhammad Ali had a cornerman named Mr. Copps. They used to hunch down there on the rope and write poems together in between rounds." "Poems? But that's not why I called, Geryon. The reason I called is to tell you about my dream. I had a dream of you last night. Did you?" "Yes. You were this old Indian guy standing on the back porch, and there was a pail of water there on the step with a drowned bird in it. Big yellow bird, really huge, you know, floating with its wings out, and you leaned over and said, 'Come on now, get out of there.' And you took it by one wing and just flung it right up into the air. Whoosh! It came alive, and then it was gone." "Yellow?" said Geryon, and he was thinking, yellow, yellow. Even in dreams he doesn't know me at all. Yellow. "What did you say, Geryon?" "Nothing." "It's a freedom dream, Geryon." "Yes. Freedom is what I want for you, Geryon. We're true friends. You know that's why I want you to be free." "Don't want to be free. Want to be with you." Beaten but alert, Geryon organized all his inside force to suppress this remark. "Guess I better get off the line now, Geryon. My grandmother gets mad if I run up her bill, but it's real nice to hear your voice." "Geryon? All right if I use the phone now. I have to call Maria." His mother, standing in the doorway. "Oh, yes, sure." Geryon replaced the receiver. "Sorry. You okay?" "Yes." He tilted to his feet. "Going out." "Where?" she said as he angled past her in the doorway. "Beach. Won't you need a jacket?" The screen door slammed. It was well past midnight when Geryon got back. The house was dark. He climbed to his room. After undressing, he stood at the mirror and observed himself emptily. Freedom. The chubby knees, the funny red smell, the saddening ways. He sank onto the bed and lay full length. Tears ran back into his ears a while, then no more tears. He had touched bottom, feeling bruised but pure. He switched off the light, fell instantly asleep. Anger slammed the red fool awake at 3 a.m. He kept trying to breathe each time he lifted his head. It pounded him again like a piece of weed against a hard black beach. Geryon sat up. Suddenly, the sheet was drenched. He switched on the light. He was staring at the sweep hand of the electric clock on the dresser. Its little dry hum ran over his nerves like a comb. He forced his eyes away. The bedroom doorway gaped at him, black as a keyhole. His brain was jerking forward like a bad slide projector. He saw the doorway, the house, the night, the world, and, on the other side of the world, somewhere, Herakles laughing, drinking, getting into a car, and Geryon's whole body formed one arch of a cry, upcast to that custom, the human custom of wrong love. 25. Tunnel. He knew who it was, even though, now that he was 22 and lived on the mainland, he spoke to her usually on Saturday mornings. He climbed across his suitcase and reached for the phone, knocking the Folder's Guide to South America and 6 boxes of DX 100 color film into the sink. Small room. "Hi, Mom." "Yes, just about." "No, I got a window seat." 17, but there's a 3-hour difference between here and Buenos Aires. "No, listen, I phoned the consulate today. There are no shots required for Argentina." "Mom, be reasonable. Flying down to Rio was made in 1933, and it's set in Brazil." "Like when we went to Florida and Dad swelled up." "Yes, okay." "Well, you know what the gauchos say. Something about riding boldly into nullity." "Not exactly. It feels like a tunnel." "Okay, I'll call as soon as I get to the hotel. Mom, I have to go now. The taxi's here. Listen, don't smoke too much." "Me too." Bye. 26. Aeroplane. It's always winter up there. As the aeroplane moved over the frozen white flatland of the clouds, Geryon left his life behind like a weak season. Once he'd seen a dog having a rabies attack, springing about like a mechanical toy and falling over on its back. In jerky ways, as if worked by wires. When the owner stepped up and put a gun to the dog's temple, Geryon walked away. Now, leaning forward to peer out the little oblong window where icy cloudlight drilled his eyes, he wished he had stayed to see it go free. Geryon was hungry. Opening his Folder's Guide, he began to read Things to Know About Argentina. The strongest harpoons are made from the bone inside the skull of a whale that beaches on Tierra del Fuego. Inside the skull is a canalita, and along it 2 bones. Harpoons made from a jawbone are not so strong. A delicious odor of roasting seal was wafting through the aeroplane. He looked up. Rows away at the front, servants were distributing dinner from a cart. Geryon was very hungry. He forced himself to stare out the cold little window and count to 100 before looking up again. The cart had not moved. He thought about harpoons. Does a man with a harpoon go hungry? Even a harpoon made of a jawbone could hit the cart from here. How do people get power over one another? This mystery. He moved his eyes back to the Folder's Guide. Among the indigenous folk of Tierra del Fuego were the Yamana, which means, as a noun, people, not animals, or as a verb, to live, breathe, be happy, recover from sickness, become sane. Joined as a suffix to the word for hand, it denotes friendship. Geryon's dinner arrived. He unwrapped and ate every item, ravenously seeking the smell he had smelled a few moments ago, but it was not there. The Yamana, too, he read, were extinct by the beginning of the 20th century. Wiped out by measles, contracted from the children of English missionaries. As night darkness glided across the outer world, the inside of the aeroplane got colder and smaller. There were neon tracks in the ceiling which extinguished themselves. Geryon closed his eyes and listened to engines vibrating deep in the moon-splashed canals of his brain. Each way he moved brought his kneecaps into hard contact with punishment. He opened his eyes again. At the very front of the cabin hung a video screen. South America glowed like an avocado. A live red line marked the progress of the aeroplane. He watched the red line inch forward from Miami towards Puerto Rico at 972 kilometers per hour. The passenger in front of him had propped his video camera gently against the sleeping head of his wife and was videotaping the video screen, which now recorded. Temperatura exterior, minus 50 degrees Celsius, and altura, 10,670 meters, as well as velocidad. The Yamana, whose filth and poverty persuaded Darwin, passing in his beagle, that they were monkey men unworthy of study, had 15 names for clouds and more than 50 for different kinds of kin. Among their variations of the verb to bite was a word that meant to come surprisingly on a hard substance when eating something soft. For example, a pearl in a mussel. Geryon shifted himself down and up in the molded seat, trying to unclench knots of pain in his spine. Half turned sideways, but could not place his left arm. Heaved himself forwards again, accidentally punching off the reading light and knocking his book to the floor. The woman next to him moaned and slumped over the armrest like a wounded seal. He sat in the numb dark, hungry again. The video screen recorded local, Bermuda, time as 10 minutes to 2. What is time made of? He could feel it massed around him. He could see its big dead-weight blocks padded tight together all the way from Bermuda to Buenos Aires. Too tight. His lungs contracted. Fear of time came at him. Time was squeezing Geryon like the pleats of an accordion. He ducked his head to peer into the little cold black glare of the window. Outside, a bitten moon rode fast over a tableland of snow, staring at the vast black and silver non-world, moving and not moving incomprehensibly past this dangling fragment of humans. He felt its indifference roar over his brain box. An idea glazed along the edge of the box and whipped back down into the canal behind the wings, and it was gone. A man moves through time. It means nothing except that, like a harpoon, once thrown, he will arrive. Geryon leaned his forehead against the cold, hard hum of the double glass and slept. On the floor under his feet, Fodor's guide lay open. The gaucho acquired an exaggerated notion of mastery over his own destiny from the simple act of riding on horseback way far across the plain. 27. Mitwelt. There is no person without a world. The red monster sat at a corner table of Café Mitwelt, writing bits of Heidegger on the postcards he'd bought. Sie sind das was betreiben. There are many Germans in Buenos Aires. They are all soccer players. The weather is lovely. Wish you were here. Geryon. He wrote to his brother, now a sportscaster at a radio station on the mainland. Over at the end of the bar, near the whiskey bottles, Geryon saw a waiter speaking to another behind his hand. He supposed they would soon throw him out. Could they tell from the angle of his body, from the way his hand moved, that he was writing German, not Spanish? It was likely illegal. Geryon had been studying German philosophy at college for the past 3 years. The waiters doubtless knew this too. He shifted his upper back muscles inside the huge overcoat, tightening his wings, and turned over another postcard. Zum verloren hören. There are many Germans in Buenos Aires. They are all psychoanalysts. The weather is lovely. Wish you were here. Geryon. He wrote to his philosophy professor, But now he noticed one of the waiters coming towards him. A cold spray of fear shot across his lungs. He rummaged inside himself for Spanish phrases. Please do not call the police. What did Spanish sound like? He could not recall a single word of it. German irregular verbs were marching across his mind as the waiter drew up at his table and stood, a brilliant white towel draped on his forearm, leaning slightly towards Geryon. Aufwärts, abwärts, rückwärts, vorwärts, auswärts, einwärts, swam crazy circles around each other, while Geryon watched the waiter extract a coffee cup smoothly from the debris of postcards covering the table and straighten his towel as he asked in perfect English, "Would the gentleman like another espresso?" But Geryon was already blundering to his feet with the postcards in one hand, coins dropping on the tablecloth, and he went crashing out. It was not the fear of ridicule, to which everyday life as a winged red person had accommodated Geryon early in life, but this blank desertion of his own mind that threw him into despair. Perhaps he was mad. In the 7th grade, he had done a science project on this worry. It was the year he began to wonder about the noise that colors make. Roses came roaring across the garden at him. He lay on his bed at night, listening to the silver light of stars crashing against the window screen. Most of those he interviewed for the science project had to admit they did not hear the cries of the roses being burned alive in the noonday sun. Like horses, Geryon would say helpfully. Like horses in war. No, they shook their heads. Why is grass called blades? He asked them. Isn't it because of the clicking? They stared at him. You should be interviewing roses, not people, said the science teacher. Geryon liked this idea. The last page of his project was a photograph of his mother's rosebush under the kitchen window. 4 of the roses were on fire. They stood up straight and pure on the stalk, gripping the dark like prophets, and howling colossal intimacies from the back of their fused throats. Didn't your mother mind, Signor? Something solid landed against his back. Geryon had come to a dead halt in the middle of a sidewalk in Buenos Aires, with people flooding around his big overcoat on every side. People, thought Geryon, for whom life is a marvelous adventure. He moved off into the tragicomedy of the crowd. 28. Skepticism. A paste of blue cloud untangled itself on the red sky over the harbor. Buenos Aires was blurring into dawn. Geryon had been walking for an hour on the sweaty black cobblestones of the city, waiting for night's end. Traffic crashed past him. He covered his mouth and nose with his hand as 5 old buses came tilting around the corner of the street and halted, one behind the other, belching soot. Passengers streamed on board like insects into lighted boxes, and the experiment roared off down the street. Pulling his body after him like a soggy mattress, Geryon trudged on uphill. Café Mitwelt was crowded. He found a corner table and was writing a postcard to his mother. Die Angst offenbart das Nichts. There are many Germans in Buenos Aires. They are all cigarette girls. The weather is When he felt a sharp tap on his boot, propped against the chair opposite. Mind if I join you? The Yellowbeard had already taken hold of the chair. Geryon moved his boot. Pretty busy in here today, said the Yellowbeard, turning to signal a waiter. Por favor, hombre. Geryon went back to his postcard. Sending postcards to your girlfriends? In the midst of his yellow beard was a pink mouth, small as a nipple. No. You sound American, am I right? You're from the States? No. The waiter arrived with bread and jam, to which the Yellowbeard bent himself. You here for a conference? No. Big conference this weekend at the university. Philosophy, skepticism, ancient or modern? Geryon could not resist asking. Well now, said the Yellowbeard, looking up. There's some ancient people here, and some modern people here. Flew me in from Irvine. My talk's at 3. What's your topic? Said Geryon, trying not to stare at the nipple. Emotionlessness. The nipple puckered. That is to say, what the ancients called ataraxia. Absence of disturbance, said Geryon. Precisely. You know ancient Greek? No, but I have read the Skeptics. So you teach at Irvine? That's in California? Yes, Southern California. Actually, I've got a grant next year to do research at MIT. Geryon watched a small red tongue clean jam off the nipple. I want to study the erotics of doubt. Why? Geryon asked. The Yellowbeard was pushing back his chair. As a precondition, and saluting the waiters across the room, of the proper search for truth. Provided you can renounce, he stood, that rather fundamental human trait. He raised both arms as if to alert a ship at sea. The desire to know. He sat. I think I can, said Geryon. Pardon? Nothing. A passing waiter slapped the bill down onto a small metal spike on the table. Traffic was crashing past outside. Dawn had faded. The gas-white winter sky came down like a gag on Buenos Aires. Would you care to come and hear my talk? We could share a cab. May I bring my camera? 29. Slopes. Although a monster, Geryon could be charming in company. He made an attempt as they hurtled across Buenos Aires in a small taxi. The two of them were crushed into the back seat with their knees against their chests. Geryon, unpleasantly aware of the Yellowbeard's thigh jolting against his own, and of breath from the nipple. He stared straight ahead. The driver was out the window, aiming a stream of rage at passing pedestrians as the car shot across a red light. He pounded the dashboard in joy and lit another cigarette, wheeling sharp left to cut off a bicyclist who bounced onto the sidewalk and dove down a side street, then veered diagonally in front of 3 buses and halted, shuddering, behind another taxi. Bleak! Argentine horns sound like cows. More blasphemy out the window. The Yellowbeard was chuckling. How's your Spanish? He said to Geryon. Not very good. What about you? Actually, I am fairly fluent. I spent a year in Spain doing research. Emotionlessness? No, law codes. I was looking at the sociology of ancient law codes. You are interested in justice? I'm interested in how people decide what sounds like a law. So what's your favorite law code? Hammurabi. Why? Neatness. For example? For example, the man who is caught stealing during a fire shall be thrown into the fire. Isn't that good? If there were such a thing as justice, that's what it ought to sound like. Short, clean, rhythmical. Like a houseboy. Pardon? Nothing. They had arrived at the University of Buenos Aires. The Yellowbeard and the taxi driver denounced one another for a few moments. Then a pittance was paid over, and the taxi rattled off. What is this place? Said Geryon, as they mounted the steps of a white concrete warehouse covered with graffiti on the outside. Inside it was colder than the winter air of the street. You could see your breath. An abandoned cigarette factory, said the Yellowbeard. Why is it so cold? They can't afford to heat it. The university is broke. The cavernous interior was hung with banners. Geryon photographed the Yellowbeard beneath one that read, Night es selbst es, taler autogestivo, jueves, 18 to 21 horas. They made their way to a bare loft called Faculty Lounge. No chairs. A long piece of brown paper nailed to the wall had a list of names in pencil and pen. Help us keep track of professors detained or disappeared, read the Yellowbeard. Muy impresivo, he said to a young man standing nearby who merely looked at him. Geryon was trying to keep his eye from resting on any one name. Suppose it was the name of someone alive, in a room, or in pain, or waiting to die. Once Geryon had gone with his fourth-grade class to view a pair of beluga whales newly captured from the upper rapids of the Churchill River. Afterwards, at night, he would lie on his bed with his eyes open, thinking of the whales afloat in the moonless tank, where their tails touched the wall, as alive as he was, on their side of the terrible slopes of time. What is time made of? Geryon said suddenly, turning to the Yellowbeard, who looked at him, surprised. Time isn't made of anything. It is an abstraction, just a meaning that we impose upon motion. But I see. He looked down at his watch. What do you mean? Wouldn't want to be late for my own lecture, would I? Let's go. Sunset begins early in winter, a bluntness at the edge of the light. Geryon hurried after the Yellowbeard through dimming corridors, past students huddled in conversation who stubbed their cigarettes underfoot, and did not look at him, to a bare brick-walled classroom with a muddle of small desks, empty one at the back. It was a tight fit in his big overcoat. He couldn't cross his knees. Presences hunched darkly in the other desks. Clouds of cigarette smoke moved above them. Butts lay thick on the concrete floor. Geryon disliked a room without rows. His brain went running back and forth over the disorder of desks, trying to see straight lines. Each time, finding an odd number, it jammed, then restarted. Geryon tried to pay attention. Un poco misterioso, the Yellowbeard was saying. From the ceiling glared 17 neon tubes. I see the terrifying spaces of the universe, hemming me in. The Yellowbeard quoted Pascal, and then began to pile words up all around the terror of Pascal, until it could scarcely be seen. Geryon paused in his listening, and saw the slopes of time spin backwards and stop. He was standing beside his mother at the window on a late winter afternoon. It was the hour when snow goes blue and streetlights come on, and a hare may pause on the tree line as still as a word in a book. In this hour, he and his mother accompanied each other. They did not turn on the light, but stood quiet and watched the night come washing up towards them, saw it arrive, touch, move past them, and it was gone. Her ash glowed in the dark. By now the Yellowbeard had moved from Pascal to Leibniz, and was chalking a formula on the blackboard. NEC equals A braces B, which he articulates using the sentence, if Fabian is white, Thomas is just as white. Why Leibniz should be concerned with the relative pallor of Fabian and Thomas did not come clear to Geryon, although he willed himself to attend to the flat voice. He noted the word necessariamente recurring 4 times, then 5 times. Then the examples turned inside out, and now Fabian and Thomas were challenging each other's negritude. If Fabian is black, Thomas is just as black. So this is skepticism, thought Geryon. White is black is white. Perhaps soon I will get some new information about red. But the examples dried away into la consecuencia, which got louder and louder as the Yellowbeard strode up and down his kingdom of seriousness bordered by strong words, maintaining belief in man's original greatness. Or was he denying it? Geryon may have missed a negative adverb and ended with Aristotle, who had compared skeptic philosophers to vegetables and to monsters. So blank and so bizarre would be the human life that tried to live outside belief in belief. Thus, Aristotle. The lecture ended, to a murmur of muchas gracias from the audience. Then someone asked a question, and the Yellowbeard began talking again. Everybody lit another cigarette and clenched down in the desks. Geryon watched smoke swirl. Outside, the sun had set. The little barred window was black. Geryon sat wrapped in himself. Would this day never end? His eye traveled to the clock at the front of the room, and he fell into the pool of his favorite question. 30. Distances. What is time made of? Is a question that had long exercised Geryon. Everywhere he went he asked people, yesterday, for example, at the university, time is an abstraction, just a meaning that we impose upon motion. Geryon is thinking this answer over as he kneels beside the bathtub in his hotel room, stirring photographs back and forth in the developing solution. He picks out one of the prints and pins it to a clothesline strung between the television and the door. It is a photograph of some people sitting at desks in a classroom. The desks look too small for them, but Geryon is not interested in human comfort. Much truer is the time that strays into photographs and stops. High on the wall hangs a white electric clock. It says 5 minutes to 6. At 5 minutes after 6 that evening, the philosophers had adjourned the classroom and made their way to a bar down the street called Guerra Civil. The Yellowbeard rode proudly at the front like a gaucho leading his infernal band over the pampas. The gaucho is master of his environment, thought Geryon, clutching his camera and keeping to the rear. Bar Guerra Civil was a white stucco room with a monk's table down the middle. When Geryon arrived, the others were already deep in talk. He slid into a chair across from a man in round spectacles. "What will you have, Laser?" said someone on the man's left. "Oh, let's see, the cappuccino is good here. I'll have a cappuccino, please, lots of cinnamon, and—" he pushed up his spectacles. "A plate of olives." He glanced across the table. "Your name is Lazarus?" said Geryon. "No, my name is Laser, as in laser beam. But do you wish to order something?" Geryon glanced at the waiter. "Coffee, please." Turned back to Laser. "Unusual name." "Not really. I am named for my grandfather. Eleazar is a fairly common Jewish name, but my parents were atheists, so—" He spread his hands. "A slight accommodation." He smiled. "And are you an atheist, too?" said Geryon. "I am a skeptic. You doubt God? Well, more to the point, I credit God with the good sense to doubt me." What is mortality, after all, but divine doubt flashing over us? For an instant, God suspends assent and proof. We disappear. It happens to me frequently. You disappear, Yes, and then come back. Moments of death, I call them. Have an olive," he added, as the waiter's arm flashed between them with a plate. "Thank you," said Geryon, and bit into an olive. The pimento stung his mouth alive like sudden sunset. He was very hungry, and ate 7 more, fast. Smiling a bit, Laser watched him. "You eat like my daughter, with a certain, shall I say, lucidity." "How old is your daughter?" asked Geryon. 4, not quite human, or perhaps a little beyond human. It is because of her I began to notice moments of death. Children make you see distances." "What do you mean, distances?" Laser paused and picked an olive from the plate. He spun it slowly on the toothpick. "Well, for example, this morning I was sitting at my desk at home, looking out on the acacia trees that grow beside the balcony, beautiful trees, very tall, and my daughter was there. She likes to stand beside me and draw pictures while I write in my journal. It was very bright this morning, unexpectedly clear, like a summer day, and I looked up and saw a shadow of a bird go flashing across the leaves of the acacia as if on a screen projected, and it seemed to me that I was standing on a hill. I have labored up to the top of this hill. Here I am. It has taken about half my life to get here, and on the other side the hill slopes down. Behind me, somewhere, if I turned around, I could see my daughter beginning to climb, hand over hand, like a little gold animal in the morning sun. That is who we are, creatures moving on a hill. At different distances, said Geryon. At distances always changing. We cannot help one another or even cry out. What would I say to her? Don't climb so fast? The waiter passed behind Laser. He was moving at a tilt. Black, outside air tossed itself hard against the windows. Laser looked down at his watch. "I must go," he said, and he was winding his yellow scarf about his neck as he rose. "Oh, don't go," thought Geryon, who felt himself starting to slide off the surface of the room like an olive off a plate. When the plate attained an angle of 30 degrees, he would vanish into his own blankness. But then his glance caught Laser's. "I have enjoyed our conversation," said Laser. "Yes," said Geryon. "Thank you." They touched hands. Laser bowed slightly and turned and went out. A gust of night pushed its way in the door, and everyone inside wavered once like stalks in a field, then resumed their talk. Geryon subsided into his overcoat, letting the talk flow over him, warm as a bath. He felt, for the moment, concrete and indivisible. The philosophers were joking about cigarettes and Spanish banks and Leibniz, then politics. One man recounted how the governor of Puerto Rico had recently proclaimed it an injustice to exclude citizens from the democratic process merely because they were insane. Apparatus for voting was transported to the state asylum. Indeed, the insane proved to be serious and creative voters. Many improved the ballot by writing in candidates they trusted would help the country. Eisenhower, Mozart, and St. John of the Cross were popular suggestions. Now, the Yellowbeard spoke up with a story from Spain. Franco, too, had understood the uses of madness. He was in the habit of bussing large groups of supporters to his rallies. On one occasion, the local madhouses were emptied for this purpose. Next day, the newspapers reported cheerfully, "Subnormals behind you all the way, Franco." Geryon's cheekbones hurt from smiling. He drained his water glass and chewed the bits of ice, then reached across for Laser's glass. He was ravenous. Try not to think about food. No hope of dinner till probably 10 p.m. Willed his attention back to the conversation, had wandered to tales. "It is not widely known," the Yellowbeard was saying, "that 12% of babies in the world are born with tails. Doctors suppress this news. They cut off the tail so it won't scare the parents. I wonder what percentage are born with wings," said Geryon, into the collar of his overcoat. They went on to discuss the nature of boredom, ending with a long joke about monks and soup that Geryon could not follow, although it was explained to him twice. The punchline contained a Spanish phrase meaning bad milk, which caused the philosophers to lean their heads on the table in helpless joy. Jokes make them happy, thought Geryon, watching. Then a miracle occurred in the form of a plate of sandwiches. Geryon took 3 and buried his mouth in a delicious block of white bread filled with tomatoes and butter and salt. He thought about how delicious it was, how he liked slippery foods, how slipperiness can be of different kinds. "I am a philosopher of sandwiches," he decided. "Things good on the inside." He would like to discuss this with someone, and for a moment the frailest leaves of life contained him in a widening happiness. When he got back to the hotel room, he set up the camera on the windowsill and activated the timer, then positioned himself on the bed. It is a black and white photograph showing a naked young man in fetal position. He has entitled it, "No Tail." The fantastic fingerwork of his wings is outspread on the bed like a black lace map of South America. 31. Tango. Under the seams runs the pain. Panic jumped down on Geryon at 3 a.m. He stood at the window of his hotel room. Empty street below gave back nothing of itself. Cars nested along the curb on their shadows. Buildings leaned back out of the street. Little rackety wind went by. Moon gone. Sky shut. Night had delved deep. Somewhere, he thought, beneath this strip of sleeping pavement, the enormous solid globe is spinning on its way, pistons thumping, lava pouring from shelf to shelf. Evidence and time lignifying into their traces. At what point does one say of a man that he has become unreal? He hugged his overcoat closer and tried to assemble in his mind Heidegger's argument about the use of moods. We would think ourselves continuous with the world if we did not have moods. It is state of mind that discloses to us, Heidegger claims, that we are beings who have been thrown into something else. Something else than what? Geryon leaned his hot forehead against the filthy window pane and wept. Something else than this hotel room. He heard himself say, and moments later he was charging along the hollow gutters of Avenida Bolivar. Traffic was sparse. He moved past shuttered kiosks and blank windows. Streets got narrower, darker, sloping down. He could see the harbor blackly glittering. Cobblestones grew slick. Smell of salt fish and latrines furred the air. Geryon turned his collar up and walked west, dirty river slapping along beside him. 3 soldiers observed him from a porch. There was a sound of dripping behind the dark air, a voice, concrete and indivisible. Down the quay he could see a dim square of light, like a cafe or a shop. But there were no cafes down here. What kind of shop would be open at 4 a.m.? A big man stepped straight out into Geryon's path and stood adjusting the towel on his arm. "Tango?" he said, and stepped back with a sweeping bow. Over the door Geryon read Caminito in white neon as he stumbled down into the soggy black interior of what, he later realized, was the only authentic tango bar left in Buenos Aires. Through the gloom, he saw very old concrete walls lined with bottles and a circle of tiny, round, red kitchen tables. A gnome in an apron was darting about among the tables, delivering the same tall, orangish drink to everyone in a glass like a test tube. A low stage at the front of the room was lit by spotlight. 3 ancient musicians hunched there. Piano, guitar, accordion. None of them looked less than 70 years old. The accordion player was so frail, each time he swayed his shoulders around a corner of the melody, Geryon feared the accordion would crush him flat. It gradually became clear that nothing could crush this man. Hardly glancing at one another, the three of them played as one person in a state of pure discovery. They tore clear and clicked and locked and unlocked. They shot their eyebrows up and down. They leaned together and wove apart. They rose and cut away and stalked one another, and flew up in a cloud and sank back down on waves. Geryon could not take his eyes off them, and was rather annoyed when a man, no, it was a woman, parted a curtain and came onto the stage. She wore a tuxedo with black tie, detached a microphone from somewhere inside the spotlight, and began to sing. It was a typical tango song, and she had the throat full of needles you need to sing it. Tangos are terrible. Your heart or my death. And they all sound the same. Geryon clapped every time the other people clapped. Then a new song started. Then they all began to blur into a stream that ran down over the dirt floor. And then he was asleep, burning, yearning, dreaming, streaming asleep. Awoke with his cheekbones scraping the wall. Looked around dully. Musicians gone. Tables empty, no lights on. Tango woman leaning over a glass while the gnome swept around her feet with a broom. He was dozing off again when he saw her rise and turn towards him. He jolted awake, pulled his body upright inside the overcoat, and tried to organize his arms casually on the front of his person. There seemed to be too many of them. In fact, there were 3, since he had, as usual, woke up with an erection, and today had no pants on, for reasons he could not immediately recall, but there wasn't time to worry about this. She was drawing a chair up to the table. "Buen dia," she said. "Hi," said Geryon. "You American?" "No." "English?" "No." "German?" "No." "Spy?" "Yes." She smiled. He watched her extract a cigarette and light it. She didn't speak. Geryon had a bad thought. Suppose she was waiting for him to say something about the music. Should he lie? Bolt? Try to distract her? "You're singing," he began and stopped. The woman glanced up. "Tango is not for everyone," she said. Geryon did not hear. The cold pressure of the concrete wall against his back had tumbled him into a recollection. He was at a Saturday night high school dance. Basketball nets cast their stretchy shadows high up the walls of the gym. Hours of music had crashed on his ears while he stood at the wall with his back pressed against cold concrete. Jolts from the stage through lit strips of human limbs across the dark. Heat bloomed. Black night sky weighed starlessly on the windows. Geryon stood upright, within the rayon planes of his brother's sports jacket. Sweat and desire ran down his body to pool in the crotch and behind the knees. He had been standing against the wall for 3.5 hours in a casual pose. His eyes ached from the effort of trying to see everything without looking at it. Other boys stood beside him, on the wall. The petals of their colognes rose around them in a light terror. Meanwhile, music pounded across hearts, opening every valve to the desperate drama of being a self in a song. "Well," said his brother, when Geryon came through the kitchen at 5 past midnight. "How was it? Who did you dance with? Do any dope?" Geryon paused. His brother was layering mayonnaise, bologna, and mustard onto 6 pieces of bread laid out on the counter beside the sink. Overhead, the kitchen light shone sulphurous. The bologna looked purple. Geryon's eyes were still bouncing with images from the gym. "Oh, this time I decided to sort of just watch, you know." Geryon's voice was loud in the too-bright room. His brother looked at him quickly, then went on piling up sandwiches into a tower. He cut the tower diagonally in half with a downthrust of the bread knife and piled it all onto a plate. There was 1 piece of bologna left in the plastic, which he shoved into his mouth as he picked up the plate and headed for the stairs, heading down to the TV room. "Jacket looks good on you," he said thickly as he passed. "Clint Eastwood movie on the Late Show. Bring me down a blanket when you come." Geryon stood, thoughtful, for a moment. Then he replaced the lids on the mayonnaise and the mustard and put them back in the fridge, threw the bologna wrapper in the garbage, took a sponge and wiped the crumbs carefully across the counter into the sink and ran water until they disappeared. From the stainless steel of the kettle, a small, red person in a big jacket regarded him. "Shall we dance?" he said to it. Crack! Geryon came abruptly awake to gritty daylight in a tango bar. The gnome was slamming chairs upside down on the red tables. Geryon could not, for the moment, recall who she was, this woman sitting across from him, knocking her cigarette on the edge of the table and saying, "Tango is not for everyone." She looked around the vacant room. The gnome was sweeping cigarette butts into a pile. Original daylight trickled weakly through gaps in the stiff little red curtains that hung at the windows. She watched it. He was trying to remember a line of a poem. "Nacht steigt ans Ufer." "What did you say?" she asked. "Nothing." He was very tired. The woman smoked in silence. "Do you ever wonder about beluga whales?" Geryon asked. Her eyebrows were startling, like 2 ascending insects. "It is an endangered species?" "No, I mean in tanks, in captivity, just floating." "No. Why?" "What do they think about? Floating there, all night?" "Nothing. That's impossible." "Why?" "You can't be alive and think about nothing." "You can't, but you're not a whale. Why should it be different? Why should it be the same? But I look in their eyes and I see them thinking." "Nonsense. It is yourself you see. It's guilt." "Guilt? Why would I be guilty about whales? Not my fault they're in a tank." "Exactly. So why are you guilty? Whose tank are you in?" Geryon was exasperated. "Was your father a psychoanalyst?" She grinned. No, it's me who's the psychoanalyst. She stared. She was serious. Don't look so shocked, she said. It pays the rent. And it's not immoral. Well, not entirely immoral. But what about your singing? Ha! She flicked ash to the floor. Make a living singing tango? How many people did you see here tonight? Geryon thought. 5 or 6, he said. That's right. Those same 5 or 6 are here every night. Goes up to 9 or 10 on weekends, maybe, if there's no soccer on TV. Sometimes we get a party of politicians from Chile or tourists from the States, but it's a fact. Tango is a fossil. So is psychoanalysis, said Geryon. She studied him a few moments, then said slowly. But the gnome gave the piano a shove against the wall, and Geryon almost missed it. Who can a monster blame for being red? What? Said Geryon, starting forward. I said, looks like time for you to get home to bed. She repeated and stood, pocketing her cigarettes. Do come again, she said as Geryon's big overcoat swept out the door. But he did not turn his head. 32. Kiss. A healthy volcano is an exercise in the uses of pressure. Geryon sat on his bed in the hotel room, pondering the cracks and fissures of his inner life. It may happen that the exit of the volcanic vent is blocked by a plug of rock, forcing molten matter sideways along lateral fissures called fire lips by volcanologists. Yet Geryon did not want to become one of those people who think of nothing but their stores of pain. He bent over the book on his knees. Philosophic Problems. I will never know how you see red, and you will never know how I see it. But this separation of consciousness is recognized only after a failure of communication, and our first movement is to believe in an undivided being between us. As he read, Geryon could feel something like tons of black magma boiling up from the deeper regions of him. He moved his eyes back to the beginning of the page and started again. To deny the existence of red is to deny the existence of mystery. The soul which does so will one day go mad. A church bell rang across the page, and the hour of 6 p.m. flowed through the hotel like a wave. Lamps snapped on, and white bedspreads sprang forward. Water rushed in the walls. The elevator crashed like a mastodon within its hollow cage. I am not the one who is crazy here, said Geryon, closing the book. He put on his coat, belted it formally, and went out. Out on the street it was Saturday night in Buenos Aires. Shoals of brilliant young men parted and closed around him. Heaps of romance spilled their bright vapor onto the pavement from behind plate glass. He stopped to stare at the window of a Chinese restaurant where 44 cans of lychee nuts were piled into a tower as big as himself. He tripped over a beggar woman, low on the curb, with 2 children pooled in her skirts. He paused at a newspaper kiosk and read every headline, then went round the other side to the magazines: architecture, geology, surfing, weightlifting, knitting, politics, sex. Bawling from behind caught his eye. A whole magazine devoted to this, issue after issue, year after year? But he was too embarrassed to buy it. He walked on, went into a bookshop, browsed through the philosophy section, and came to English Books All Kinds. Under a tower of Agatha Christie was one Elmore Leonard, Killshot, he'd read it, and Collected Verse of Walt Whitman, in a bilingual edition. It is not upon you alone the dark patches fall. The dark threw its patches down upon me also. The best I had done seemed to me blank and suspicious, nor is it you alone who know what it is to be evil. Tu solo quien sabe lo que es ser perverso. Geryon put evil Walt Whitman down and opened a self-help book whose title, Oblivion, the Price of Sanity, stirred his ever-hopeful heart. Depression is one of the unknown modes of being. There are no words for a world without a self, seen with impersonal clarity. All language can register is the slow return to the oblivion we call health when imagination automatically recolors the landscape, and habit blurs perception, and language takes up its routine flourishes. He was about to turn the page for more help when a sound caught him, like kissing. He looked around. A workman stood halfway up a ladder outside the front window of the shop. Some dark-colored bird was swooping at him, and each time the bird came near, the man made a kissing noise with his mouth. The bird somersaulted upwards, then dove again with a little swagger and a cry. Kissing makes them happy, thought Geryon, and a sense of fruitlessness pierced him. He turned to go and bumped hard into the shoulder of a man standing next to him. Oh! The stale black taste of leather filled his nose and lips. I'm sorry. Geryon's heart stopped. The man was Herakles. After all these years, he picks a day when my face is puffy. 33. Fast forward. That was a shocker. They agreed over coffee at Café Mitwelt later the same day. Geryon couldn't decide which was more odd, to be sitting across the table from a grown-up Herakles or to hear himself using expressions like a shocker. And what about this young man with black eyebrows who sat on Herakles' left? They do have a language, Ankash was saying. Herakles had explained that he and Ankash were traveling around South America, together recording volcanoes. It's for a movie, Herakles added. A nature film? Not exactly. A documentary on Emily Dickinson. Of course, said Geryon. He was trying to fit this Herakles onto the one he knew. On my volcano grows the grass. Herakles went on, is one of her poems. Yes, I know, said Geryon. I like that poem. I like the way she refuses to rhyme sod with God. Ankash, meanwhile, was taking a tape recorder out of his pocket. He slipped a tape into it and offered the earphones to Geryon. Listen to this, he said. It's Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. We were there last winter. Geryon put the earphones on, heard a hoarse animal spraying pain from the back of its throat. Then, heavy, irregular bumping sounds like tractor tires rolling downhill. Herakles was watching. Do you hear the rain? He said. Rain? Geryon adjusted the earphones. The sound was hot as a color inside. It was monsoon season, said Herakles. Volcanic ash and fire were mixing in mid-air with the rain. We saw villagers racing downhill and a black wall of hot mud behind them 20 meters high. That's what you hear on the tape. It sort of rustles as it moves because it's full of boiling chunks of solid rock. Geryon listened to the boiling rocks. He also heard broken sounds like glassware snapping, which he realized were human cries, then gunshots. Gunshots? He asked. They had to send the army in, said Herakles. Even with lava coming down the hills at 90 kilometers, some people didn't want to leave their homes. Oh, here, listen. Ancash interrupted. He was fast-forwarding the tape, then restarted it. Listen to this. Geryon listened, heard again the ripe animal growl. But then came some solid thuds, like melons hitting the ground. He looked at Ancash. Up high the air gets so hot it burns the wings off birds. They just fall. Ancash stopped. He and Geryon were looking straight into each other's eyes. At the word wings, something passed between them like a vibration. Ancash was fast-forwarding again. About here, I think, yes, is the part from Japan. Listen, it's a tsunami. 100 kilometers from crest to crest when it hit the beach. We saw fishing boats carried inland as far as the next village. Geryon listened to water destroying a beach in Japan. Ancash was talking of continental plates. It's worst at the edges of ocean trenches, where one continental plate sinks under another. Aftershocks can go on for years. I know, said Geryon. Herakles' gaze on him was like a gold tongue, magma rising. Beg your pardon, said Ancash. But Geryon was taking the earphones off and reaching for the belt of his coat. Got to go. The effort it took to pull himself away from Herakles' eyes could have been measured on the scale devised by Richter. Call us. We're at the City Hotel, said Herakles. The Richter scale has neither a minimum nor a maximum threshold. Everything depends on the sensitivity of the seismograph. Sure, okay, said Geryon, and threw himself out the door. 34. Harrods. Geryon sat in his hotel room on the end of the bed, staring at the blank TV screen. It was 7 a.m. Total agitation possessed him. He had held off phoning Herakles for 2 days. Even now he was not looking at the telephone, which he had placed in the bottom of his sock drawer. He was not thinking about the two of them in their hotel room on the other side of Plaza de Mayo. He was not remembering how Herakles liked to make love early in the morning, like a sleepy bear taking the lid off a jar of honey. Geryon got up suddenly and went into the bathroom, removed his overcoat and turned on the shower, stood under cold water for a minute and a half while a fragment of Emily Dickinson chased around in his head. I never have taken a peach in my hand so late in the year. Why a peach? He was wondering when, from deep in its cave of socks, the telephone rang. Geryon dove for it. Geryon, that you? Hungry? Said Herakles' voice. So an hour later he found himself sitting across the table from Ancash, amid the morning carnival of Café Mitwelt. Herakles had gone for a newspaper. Ancash sat very straight, a man as beautiful as a live feather. Your name, what does it mean? Is it Spanish? No, it is a Quechua word. Quechua? Quechua is spoken in the Andes. It is one of the oldest indigenous languages of Peru. You're from Peru. From Huaraz. Where is that? Huaraz is in the mountains north of Lima. You were born there? No, Huaraz is the town of my mother. I was born in Lima. My father was a priest who wanted to become a bishop, so my mother took me back to the mountains." Ancash smiled, as Herakles would say. Such is life in the tropics. Herakles appeared, ruffling Geryon's hair as he came past. "Who, me?" he said, sitting down. But Geryon was looking at Ancash. "Is she still there in Juarez, your mother?" "No. The terrorists were blowing up cars and TV stations in that part of the mountains last winter. She got angry. 'Death is stupid,' she said, and went back to Lima. Does she like Lima? No one likes Lima. But how does she live? Is she alone? Not really. She cooks for a couple of rich people 5 days a week, some gringo anthropologist from the States, and his wife. The guy is paying her to teach him Quechua. He lets her live on the roof of his house. The roof? In Lima they use everything." "Quechua? I know some Quechua," Herakles put in brightly. Ancash gave him a raw look. Herakles continued, "It's a song, but I don't know the music, just the words. Maybe I'll make up the music." He started to sing. His voice rose and fell around the strange syllables like a child's. Geryon watched him uneasily. The voice flowed out like a fragrance released in rain. "Kupicheka, kupicheka, vami in yanayaku, kupicheka, kupicheka, apacheta runa sapan, kupicheka, in Ancash puru, kupicheka. In silutambo, kupicheka, kupicheka." When he finished it, Herakles grinned at Geryon and said, "The Kupicheka song. Ancash taught it to me. Want to know what the words mean?" Geryon merely nodded. "Kupicheka." Herakles began. "That means right, left, right, left." Ancash's chair, which had tilted backward on 2 legs, came crashing forward. "Let's do Quechua lessons another time. I want to get to the post office before noon." Soon they were out on the street, walking fast along Avenida Bolivar, with a hard wind strumming their bodies. Herakles jumping ahead like a dog, smelling everything and pointing at objects in the shops. Ancash and Geryon came behind. "Aren't you cold?" said Geryon to Ancash, who had no coat on. "No," said Ancash. Then he looked sideways at Geryon. "Well, actually, yes." He smiled. Geryon would have liked to wrap his coat around this feather man. They walked on, bent against the wind. The winter sun had thrown its bleak wares in the sky, and people going past looked dazzled. 2 women in furs came towards them, swaying on their heels, like big gold foxes. No! They are men, Geryon saw as they passed. Ancash was staring too. The foxes disappeared into the crowd. Ancash and Geryon walked on. Now a hunger was walking with them. "That song Herakles sang," Geryon said. "I heard your name in the middle of it, in Ancash Puru. Is that right?" "You have a good ear," said Ancash. "What does it mean?" said Geryon. Ancash hesitated. "Hard to translate. Ancash is something like—" But Herakles whirled towards them, waving his arms. "Here!" he cried, pointing at a very large department store, with deep red awnings. "Harrods of London," said the brass letters over the door. Herakles had vanished through the revolving door. Geryon and Ancash followed, then stopped. Inside Harrods, life was at pause. In a numb grey twilight, salesgirls floated like survivors of a wreck. There were no customers. The aisles smelled of tea. Deep in the display cases, a few chill objects lay stranded on dusty sateen, Lumps of English air exhaled from biscuit tins and moved aimlessly about the room, causing sudden faded spots. One very brightly lit case held clocks and watches, all furiously ticking, all registering 6:15. Geryon saw a head moving up the escalator. "Come on," he said to Ankash. "He always knows where to find the bathrooms." Ankash nodded. At the top of the escalators, they made their way around a pyramid of jellied tongue and rubber boots. And there was Herakles on the other side of the store, waving wildly. "Show you something! Over here!" They would discuss for days after what they had seen against the back wall of the second floor of Harrods. Except for tongue and boots, the second floor is virtually deserted. But hovering in shadow, this presence, a circus carousel with 6 full-sized wooden animals hitched to gold and silver posts on a crippled baize roulette. The lion and the white pony are still upright and foaming forward. The zebra, elephant, tiger, and black bear lie toppled from harness, gazing skyward. "It's a nursery," said Herakles. "It's the etymology of Argentina," said Ankash. Geryon was kneeling down beside the zebra. "Want to try stealing the tiger? Looks like it's loose," said Herakles. No one answered. Ankash was watching Geryon. He knelt down too. Geryon was memorizing the zebra so he could make a photograph later, time-lapse. He touched his fingertips to the silk of the eyelashes, each one set individually into its wooden sprocket in the painted eyelid above a burning eye. "Made in Germany, I bet," said Ankash. "Look at the workmanship." Geryon turned to Ankash as if remembering who he was. "Can I photograph you later?" Geryon said. Just then, a tiny refracted Herakles appeared in the staring glass of the eyeball. Standing above them, Herakles said, "Ankash, I want to take the tiger to your mother, especially if we'll be there for her birthday. Perfect gift." "What's the word for tiger in Quechua? You told me once, but I forgot." "Tezca," said Ankash, getting to his feet. "Tezca. That's it, Tezca, the tiger god. But he has another name, doesn't he?" "Many names." "Herakles, what are you doing?" Herakles was hoisting the tiger from the floor. With a pocket knife, he began cutting at the thick leather reins which still bound the tiger to its circus habits. "Okay, Herakles, suppose we do get it out of Harrods." Ankash spoke reasonably. "What about the airport? Does it strike you Peru may object to a life-size wooden circus animal boarding their plane?" "Don't be irreverent," Herakles panted. "He's not a wooden circus animal. He's Tezca, the tiger god. He can go on as baggage." "Baggage?" "We'll wrap him in a gun bag. Lots of people take guns to Peru." Ankash sat down on the edge of the carousel, resting his arms on his knees. Ankash watched Herakles. Geryon watched Ankash. He was in an inward fury. So they're off to Peru, leaving me here without a backward glance, when a dull clank came down on a shuddering sound. Harrods went dark. Geryon heard a low voice say, "He always knows where to find the fuse box." Alarms went off all over the store, and Herakles ran up, and then the 3 of them were hoisting the tiger onto his shoulders and heading for the escalator. "Vamos, hombres!" yelled Herakles. And so they went to Peru. 35. Gladys. Not only was he very hungry, but much more humiliating. 12,000 meters above the mountains that divide Argentina from Chile, with their long white gouges tracing the red sandstone like a meringue pie, Geryon felt himself becoming aroused. He was sitting in between Herakles and Ankash. The plane was cold, and they had an aeroperu blanket thrown over the three of them. Geryon was trying to read. He had not realized until he found himself stranded in it high above the Andes, halfway to Lima, that the novel he'd bought in the Buenos Aires airport was pornographic. It made him furious with himself to be stirred by dull sentences like, Gladys slid a hand under her nightgown and began to caress her own thighs. Gladys. He loathed the name, but his thighs under the aeroperu blanket were very warm. He snapped off the light and shoved the book deep out of sight, in the seat pocket ahead of him, sat back in the dark. On his left side, Herakles stirred in sleep. Ancash was motionless, on the right. Geryon tried to cross his knees but could not, then shifted sideways to the left. He would pretend to be asleep, so he could lean against Herakles' shoulder. The smell of the leather jacket near his face and the hard pressure of Herakles' arm under the leather sent a wave of longing as strong as a color through Geryon. It exploded at the bottom of his belly. Then the blanket shifted. He felt Herakles' hand move on his thigh, and Geryon's head went back like a puppy in a breeze. As Herakles' mouth came down on his, and blackness sank through him, Herakles' hand was on his zipper. Geryon gave himself up to pleasure as the aeroplane moved at 978 kilometers per hour through clouds registering -57 degrees centigrade. Two women with toothbrushes stumbled up the aisle in the reddish dawn dark. These are all very fine passengers, thought Geryon dreamily, as he and the plane began descent to Lima. It filled him with tenderness to see many of the people had little red flush marks on their cheeks, where they had slept with faces pressed to the seat cushion. Gladys. 36. Roof. A soiled white Saturday morning in Lima. The sky heavy and dark, as if before rain, but it hadn't rained in Lima since 1940. On the roof of the house, Geryon stood looking out to sea. Chimneys and lines of laundry surrounded him on all sides. Everything curiously quiet. On the roof next door, a man in black silk kimono emerged at the top of a ladder. Clutching his kimono around him, he stepped onto the roof and stood motionless in front of a big, rusted water tank. Stared hard at the tank, then lifted the brick holding down the lid and peered inside. Replaced the brick, went back down the ladder. Geryon turned to see Ancash climbing up to the roof. "Buenos dias," said Ancash. "Hi," said Geryon. Their eyes failed to meet. "You slept well?" asked Ancash. "Yes, thank you." They had all three slept on the roof, in sleeping bags borrowed from the American downstairs. Ancash's mother had the roof divided into living, sleeping, and horticultural areas. Beside the water tank was where guests slept. Next to that was Ancash's room, an area bordered on one side by the clothesline, where Ancash had neatly arranged his T-shirts on hangers, and on the other side by a scarred highboy inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Beside the highboy was the library. Here were two sofas and a bookcase packed with books. On the writing desk stood piles of paper, weighted down with tins of tobacco, and a gooseneck reading lamp that plugged into a cracked extension cord, running across the desk and over the roof and down the ladder to the kitchen. Ancash had made a ceiling of palm fronds above the library. They moved and clicked in the wind like wooden tongues. Next to the library was a squat structure built of clear, heavy plastic and some pieces of dismantled telephone booth. Here, Ankash's mother grew a cash crop of marijuana and herbs for cooking. She called it festinito, little feast, and said it was her favorite place in the world. Plaster figures of St. Francis and St. Rose of Lima were placed encouragingly among the plants. She herself slept next to the little feast on a cot piled high with bright blankets. "You were not cold?" Ankash continued. "Oh, no, just fine," said Geryon. In fact, he had never been so cold in his life as last night, under the dull red winter stars of Lima. Ankash came over to the edge of the roof and stood beside Geryon, staring down towards the streets and the sea. Geryon stared too. Sounds came to them across the white air. There was the slow thock of a hammer, an uncertain music like a water pipe starting and stopping. Many layers of traffic, a crackle of garbage burning, dry howls of dogs. Sounds entered Geryon, small at first, but gradually filling his mind. The streets below were, after all, not empty. Two men crouched beside a half-built wall pulling bricks out of a little stone oven on a shovel. A boy was sweeping the steps of the church, with a palm frond as big as himself. A man and woman stood eating breakfast out of plastic containers and staring in opposite directions up and down the street. They had a thermos and 2 cups perched on the hood of their car. 5 policemen strolled past with carbines. Down on the beach, a soccer team was practicing, and beyond them, the filthy Pacific came crashing in. "It is different from Argentina," said Geryon. "How do you mean?" "No one here is in a hurry." Ankash smiled but said nothing. "They move so softly," Geryon added. He was watching the soccer team, whose movements had the rounded languor of a dream. Smells of burning blew across the air. Dogs went nosing without urgency through the garbage and marigolds that lined the sea wall. "You're right. Argentinians are much faster. Always going somewhere." Geryon could see many small Peruvian people wandering along the seawall. Often they would stop to stare at nothing in particular. "Everyone seems to be waiting," said Geryon. "Waiting for what?" said Ankash. "Yes, waiting for what?" said Geryon. There was a sudden, loud hiss. The electrical cord that ran across the roof at their feet exploded in light sparks. "Damn," said Ankash. "I wish she'd rewire this. Every time someone plugs in the kettle in the kitchen, we have a meltdown." Herakles' head appeared on the ladder. "Hombres!" He clambered up onto the roof, big chunk of papaya in his hand which he waved at Geryon. "You should try this stuff, Geryon. It's like eating the sun." Herakles sank his mouth into the fruit and grinned at them. Juice ran down his face and onto his bare chest. Geryon watched a drop of sun slide past Herakles' nipple and over his belly and vanish into the top of his jeans. He moved his eyes away. "Did you see the parrots?" Herakles demanded. "Parrots?" said Geryon. "Yes, she has a room full of parrots at the front of the house. Must be 50 birds in there. Purple, green, orange, blue, yellow. It's like an explosion, and there's one big motherfucker who's totally gold. Says she's gonna have to get rid of it." "Why?" asked Geryon. "Kills everything smaller than itself. Last week it killed the cat." "That's conjecture," Ankash interrupted. "No one saw it kill the cat." "Whose cat?" asked Geryon, rather lost. Marguerite's, said Ankash. Marguerite is the wife of the American downstairs. You remember she lent us the sleeping bags last night? Oh, said Geryon. The woman with the cold hands. He barely recalled introductions in a foggy kitchen at 4 a.m. Thing is, who else would have killed the cat? Herakles persisted. Gorillas, maybe, said Ankash. Last winter they killed all the cats in Huaraz one weekend. Why? Said Geryon. A gesture, said Ankash. Gesture of what? Said Geryon. Well, it was after a TV broadcast where the president spoke from his living room. He sat in an armchair with a cat on his lap, explaining how the police had the terrorists completely under control. Next day, no cats. Good thing he didn't have his wife on his lap, said Herakles, licking his chin. The electrical cord was sparking again. A little black puff rose from it. Want me to fix that? Said Herakles, as he wiped his hands on his jeans. Okay, said Ankash. My mother would appreciate it. Got any duct tape? Said Herakles. I don't know, let's go look in the kitchen. They disappeared down the ladder. Geryon closed his eyes a moment, pulling his overcoat tight around him. The wind had changed, now blowing in from the sea and carrying a raw smell. Geryon was cold, hungry. His body felt like a locked box. Lima is terrible, he thought. Why am I here? Overhead, the sky waited too. 37. Eyewitnesses. Saturday went whitely on. Geryon walked along the seawall. He passed groups of people waiting and individuals waiting. There was neither excitement nor the absence of excitement. Dogs waited. Police waited, resting their guns against a parked car. The soccer team had withdrawn from the beach to wait on a veranda overlooking the seawall. While waiting, most people gazed steadily out to sea or down the street. A few kicked stones. Geryon started back to the house. From a block away he could hear the parrots. No one was home. He went up on the roof and sat on his cot trying to think how to photograph Lima. But his brain was as blank as the featureless sky. He went out walking again, along the seawall, past many small shut houses, down alleyways where stinging sea fog hung in clots over the cobblestones, across a ragged park where 2 llamas were tethered beside a gigantic bronze head, its mouth open in an O, as when someone dies laughing. Geryon sat in the mouth, dangling his feet and eating a banana, while the llamas pulled at the sparse grass. Mental states like anxiety or grief have degrees, he thought, but boredom has no degrees. I shall never amount to much, he remarked to the llamas. They did not look up. Geryon tossed his half-eaten banana onto the ground near them. They nosed it out of the way and kept on pulling grass. Geryon saw night was coming on. He climbed out of the mouth and went his way, back along the seawall towards the house, with the chicken-wired front window, where 50 red parrots dove and roared like a conscious waterfall. That would be a good title for the photograph, Geryon thought as he strode along. Night always perked him up. Many hours later, Geryon was sitting on his cot on the roof, thinking about sleep, but too cold to move. Ankash appeared, on the ladder, with his blankets in his arms, piled them on the floor by Geryon. I will show you how to keep warm. on a winter night in Lima, said Ankash. It's very simple. The important thing is, do you need to take a piss? Because once I wrap you up, you'll have to stay that way till morning. No, I'm okay, but good. Then come over here and take off your overcoat. Take off what? Said Herakles, jumping off the ladder. You having a party up here without me? Ankash was unfolding a blanket. I'm showing Geryon a way to stay warm for the night, he said. Herakles came towards them, grinning. I could show him some ways to stay warm for the night. Geryon paused, like a hare in headlights. Ankash took a step. Why don't you let things be? He said to Herakles. There was a moment of thick silence. Then Herakles shrugged and turned away. Okay, he said. I'll go down and smoke dope with your mother. My mother doesn't smoke dope, she only sells it, said Ankash to Herakles' back. And she'll make you pay. We'll see, said Herakles, and vanished down the ladder. Ankash looked at Geryon. Difficult man, he said. He held up the blanket. Geryon looked on numbly. Okay, now off with your coat. And then take hold of this end while I wrap the rest of it around you, said Ankash, holding out the blanket. It's pure wool. It will trap all your body heat if we wind it right. Come on, Geryon. You'll have to lift your... Listen, Ankash, Geryon broke in. This is great, I really appreciate it, but I think it'd be better if you just leave the blankets here and let me do it myself. Don't be stupid, Geryon. How can you do it yourself? It has to go all the way around you 2 or 3 times. Then you lie down and I pile the others on top. No, really, Ankash, I don't... Geryon, sometimes you try my patience. Just do it, okay? Just give me the benefit of the doubt here. I've had a very long day. Ankash stepped forward and pulled Geryon's overcoat down past his shoulders and off his arms. It fell to the floor. Then he thrust the blanket into Geryon's hands and spun him around so he could start wrapping from the back. All of a sudden, the night was a bowl of silence. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, said Ankash quietly. He gave a low whistle. Ankash had not seen Geryon's wings before. They rustled through the 2 slits, cut in back of Geryon's t-shirt, and sank a bit on the night wind. Ankash ran his fingers slowly down the red struts that articulated each wing base. Geryon shivered. He wondered if he was going to faint. Yes, Kamak, whispered Ankash. He took Geryon by the arms and rotated him to face front. I beg your pardon, said Geryon, in a faraway voice. Here, sit down, we have to talk. Ankash pushed Geryon down on the cot. He picked a blanket off the floor and threw it around Geryon's shoulders, then sat beside him. Thanks, mumbled Geryon, pulling the blanket over his head. Now listen to me, Geryon, Ankash was saying. There's a village in the mountains north of Huaraz called Juca, and in Juca they believe some strange things. It's a volcanic region, not active now. In ancient times, they worshipped the volcano as a god and even threw people into it. For sacrifice? Asked Geryon, whose head had come out of the blanket. No, not exactly. More like a testing procedure. They were looking for people from the inside, wise ones. Holy men, I guess you would say. The word in Quechua is Yazkol Yazkamak. It means the ones who went and saw and came back. I think the anthropologists say eyewitnesses. These people did exist. Stories are told of them still. Eyewitnesses, said Geryon. Yes. People who saw the inside of the volcano and came back. Yes. How do they come back? Wings. Wings? Yes. That's what they say. The Yazgamak return as red people with wings, all their weaknesses burned away, and their mortality. What's wrong, Geryon? Geryon was scratching furiously. Something biting me, he said. Oh, shit. I wonder where that blanket's been. Here. Ankash pulled it off. Give it to me. Probably. Parrot ticks those birds are. Hombres, said Herakles, bounding up the ladder. Guess what? We're going to Waras. Your mother wants to show me the town. Ankash stared dumbly at Herakles, who didn't notice but fell onto the cot beside Geryon. We're going to see the high Andes, Geryon. First thing tomorrow. I'll get a rental car, and we'll start. Be there by dark, she says. Marguerite is giving your mom the day off, he said, turning to Ankash, so we can stay all weekend. Come back Sunday night. What do you think? He grinned at Ankash. Think you're quite an operator is what I think. Yeah, Herakles laughed, and flicked Geryon's blanket. I'm a master of monsters, aren't I? He grabbed Geryon and tumbled him back onto the cot. Fuck off, Herakles. Geryon's voice came out, muffled under Herakles' arm, but Herakles jumped up. Have to call the rental place. He rushed down the ladder. Ankash watched Geryon in silence as he gathered himself to the edge of the cot and sat slowly upright. Geryon, you'll have to be careful in Waras. There are people around there still looking for eyewitnesses. If you see someone checking your shadow, you come get me, okay? He smiled. Okay. Geryon almost smiled. Ankash paused. And listen, if you're cold tonight, you can sleep with me. With a look, he added, just sleep. He left. Geryon sat staring out over the roofs into the darkness. The Pacific at night is red and gives off a soot of desire. Every 10 meters or so along the seawall, Geryon could see small twined couples. They looked like dolls. Geryon wished he could envy them, but he did not. I have to get out of this place, he thought, immortal or not. He climbed into his sleeping bag and slept until dawn without moving. 38. Car. Geryon sat in the back seat, watching the edge of Herakles' face. He had dreamed of thorns, a forest of huge, blackish-brown thorn trees where creatures that looked like young dinosaurs, yet they were strangely lovely, went crashing through underbrush and tore their hides which fell behind them in long red strips. He would call the photograph Human Valentines. Herakles, in the front seat, rolled down his window to buy a tamale. They were driving through downtown Lima. At each traffic light, the car was surrounded by a swarm of children selling food, cassettes, crucifixes, American dollar bills, and Inca Cola. Vamos! Shouted Herakles, pushing the arms of several children out of the car as Ankash's mother shifted gears and shot the car ahead. Bright smells of tamale filled the car. Ankash sank back to sleep, with his head against a thick knot of greasy cloth plugging one of the holes in the side of the car. Got an air-conditioned one, Herakles had announced with a grin when he returned from the rental place. Ankash's mother said nothing, as was her custom, but motioned him out of the driver's seat. Then she took the wheel, and off they went. They drove for hours through the filthy white sludge of Lima suburbs, where houses were bags of cement piled up to a cardboard roof, or automobile tires in a circle with one tire burning in the middle. Geryon watched children in spotless uniforms with pointy white collars emerge from the cardboard houses and make their way along the edge of the highway, laughing, jumping, holding their book bags high. Then Lima ended. The car was enclosed in a dense fist of fog. They drove on blindly, no sign of road or sea. The sky got dark. Just as suddenly, fog ended and they came out on an empty plateau where sheer green walls of sugarcane rose straight up on both sides of the car. Sugarcane ended. They drove up, and up, and up, and up, around switchbacks carved out of bare rock, higher and higher all afternoon, past one or two other cars. Then they were entirely alone as the sky lifted them towards itself. Ancash was asleep. His mother did not speak. Herakles was strangely silent. What is he thinking? Geryon wondered. Geryon watched prehistoric rocks move past the car and thought about thoughts. Even when they were lovers, he had never known what Herakles was thinking. Once in a while he would say, "Penny for your thoughts," and it always turned out to be some odd thing like a bumper sticker or a dish he'd eaten in a Chinese restaurant years ago. What Geryon was thinking, Herakles never asked. In the space between them developed a dangerous cloud. Geryon knew he must not go back into that cloud. Desire is no light thing. He could see the thorns gleam with their black stains. Herakles had once told him he had a fantasy of being made love to in a car by a man who tied his hands to the door. Perhaps he is thinking of that now, thought Geryon, as he watched the side of Herakles' face. The car all of a sudden flew up in the air and crashed down again onto the road. "Madonna!" spat out Ancash's mother. She shifted gears as they lurched forward. The road had been getting steadily rockier during their ascent, and now was little more than a dirt path strewn with boulders. It seemed that darkness had descended, but then the car rounded a curve and the sky rushed open before them. Bowl of gold, where the last moments of sunset were exploding, then another curve, and blackness snuffed out all. "I could really go for a hamburger right now," Herakles announced. Ancash moaned in his sleep. Ancash's mother said nothing. The car passed a small cement house with no roof. Then another. Then a huddle of women squatting on the ground, smoking cigarettes in the glare of the moon. "Varas," said Geryon. 39. Varas. Water boils in Varas at 70 degrees centigrade. It is very high. The altitude will set your heart jumping. The town is held in a ring of bare sand-rock mountains, but to the north rises one sudden angular fist of total snow. "Andes!" cried Herakles, as he entered the dining room. They had stayed overnight in Varas Hotel Turistico. The dining room faced north and was so dark against the morning light outside they were all momentarily blinded. They sat. "I think we are the only guests in this hotel," said Geryon, looking around the empty tables. Ancash nodded. "No tourism in Peru anymore." "No foreigners?" "No foreigners, no Peruvians either. Nobody goes north of Lima these days." "Why?" said Geryon. "Fear," said Ancash. "This coffee tastes weird," said Herakles. Ancash poured coffee and tasted it then spoke to his mother in Quechua. "She says it's got blood in it." "What do you mean, blood? Cow blood? It's a local recipe, supposed to strengthen your heart." Ancash leaned toward his mother and said something that made her laugh. But Herakles was gazing out the window. "The light is amazing," he said. "Looks like TV." Now he was putting on his jacket. "Who wants to go exploring?" Soon they were proceeding up the main street of Huaraz. It rises in sharp relations of light towards the fist of snow. Lining both sides of the street are small wooden tables where you can buy chiclets, pocket calculators, socks, round loaves of hot bread, televisions, lengths of leather, Inca Cola, tombstones, bananas, avocados, aspirin, soap, AAA batteries, scrub brushes, car headlights, coconuts, American novels, American dollars. The tables are manned by women as small and tough as cowboys who wear layers of skirts and a black fedora. Men wearing dusty black suits and the fedora stand about in knots for discussion. Children dressed in blue school uniforms or tracksuits and the fedora chase around the tables. There are a few smiles, many broken teeth, no anger. Ancash and his mother were speaking Quechua all the time now, or else Spanish with Herakles. Geryon kept the camera in his hand and spoke little. "I am disappearing," he thought. But the photographs were worth it. A volcano is not a mountain like others. Raising a camera to one's face has effects no one can calculate in advance. 40. Photographs. Origin of time. It is a photograph of 4 people sitting around a table with hands in front of them. The pipe glows on a small clay bowl in the middle. Beside it, a kerosene lamp. Monstrous rectangles flare up the walls. "I will call it Origin of Time," thought Geryon, as a terrible coldness came through the room from somewhere. It was taking him a very long while to set up the camera. Enormous pools of a moment kept opening around his hands, each time he tried to move them. Coldness was planing the sides of his vision, leaving a narrow canal down which the shock. Geryon sat on the floor suddenly. He had never been so stoned in his life. "I am too naked," he thought. This thought seemed profound, and "I want to be in love with someone." This too fell on him deeply. It is all wrong. Wrongness came like a lone finger, chopping through the room, and he ducked. "What was that?" said one of the others, turning towards him centuries later. 41. Photographs. Jates. It is a close-up photograph of Geryon's left pant leg, just below the knee. Resting the camera on the rear window of the car, Geryon is watching the road fall away behind them into a light so brilliant it feels cold and hot at once. The car hurtles over gravel and rock, traveling almost vertically on the steep mountain track that leads up to Ichkantikas. Car travel gives some people hemorrhoids. Each time the car bounces him up and down, Geryon utters a little red cry. No one hears him. Herakles and Ancash in the front seat are, in English, discussing Yeats, which Ancash pronounced Jates. "Not Jates, Yeats," says Herakles. "What? Yeats, not Jates. Sounds the same to me. It's like the difference between jello and yellow. Jello?" Herakles sighs. "English is a bitch," Ancash's mother announces unexpectedly from the back seat. and that closes it. Ankash hits the brakes, and the car jumps to a halt. Geryon's hot apple ice picks all the way up his anus to his spine as 4 soldiers appear from nowhere to surround the car. Geryon is focusing the camera on their guns when Ankash's mother slides her left hand over the shutter and gently forces it out of sight between Geryon's knees. 42. Photographs. The Meek. It is a photograph of 2 burros grazing on spiky grass in a stubble field. What is it about burros? Geryon is thinking. Except burros, there is not much to see out the car window as he and the mother sit waiting in the back seat. The police have taken Ankash and Herakles down the road and vanished into a little adobe house. The burros seek and munch with their long silk ears angled towards the hot sky. Their necks and knobby knees make Geryon sad. No, not sad, he decides. But what? Ankash's mother says a few fast, harsh Spanish words out her side of the car. She seems to be stating her mind boldly today. Perhaps he will do the same. What is it about burros? He says aloud. Guess they're waiting to inherit the earth. She answers him in English, with a little rough laugh that he thinks about all the rest of the day. 43. Photographs. I am a beast. It is a photograph of a guinea pig lying on her right side, on a plate. She is surrounded by cabbage salad and large round slices of yam. 2 perfect tiny white teeth project over her blackened lower lip. Her flesh, still sizzling from the oven, gives off a hot glow, and her left eye is looking straight up at Geryon. He taps the flank twice shyly with his fork, then sets the utensil down and waits for the meal to be over. Meanwhile, Herakles and Ankash and the mother and the 4 soldiers, who invited them all for lunch, are chopping and chewing with gusto. Geryon studies the room. Noon shadows shift down from a light hole cut in the roof. A big black iron stove still crackles. The floor is covered with mats of woven palms, and a few survivor guinea pigs are gamboling about near the stove. Propped on 3 Inca Cola crates, facing the table, is the TV. Jeopardy is on, volume low. 4 guns rest by the door. Ichanticas is active, yes? One of the soldiers is telling Herakles, "You'll see when you get to Juca." The town is built into the slope of the volcano. There are holes in the wall you can look through and see the fire. They use them to bake bread. "I don't believe you," says Herakles. The soldier shrugs. Ankash's mother looks up. "No, it's true," she says. "Lava bread." Makes you passionate. A greasy grin passes around the soldiers. "What does it mean?" "Ichanticas?" asks Geryon. Ankash looks at his mother. She says something in Quechua. Ankash turns to Geryon, but one of the soldiers interrupts, speaking in fast Spanish to Ankash's mother. She watches the soldier a moment, then shoves back her chair. "Muchas gracias, hombres," she says. "We go." In the cooling left eye of the guinea pig, they all stand reflected, pulling out their chairs and shaking hands. The eye empties. 44. Photographs. The old days. It is a photograph of a man's naked back, long and bluish. Herakles, standing at the window, staring out on the dark before dawn. When they made love, Geryon liked to touch in slow succession each of the bones in Herakles' back as it arched away from him into Who knows what dark dream of its own, running both hands all the way down from the base of the neck to the end of the spine, which he can cause to shiver like a root in the rain. Herakles makes a low sound and moves his head on the pillow, slowly opens his eyes. He starts. "Geryon, what's wrong? Jesus, I hate it when you cry. What is it?" Geryon thinks hard. "I once loved you. Now I don't know you at all." He does not say this. "I was thinking about time." He gropes. "You know how apart people are in time together, and apart at the same time." Stops. Herakles wipes tears from Geryon's face with one hand. "Can't you ever just fuck and not think?" Herakles gets out of bed and goes into the bathroom. Then he comes back and stands at the window a long while. By the time he returns to the bed, it is getting light. "Well, Geryon, just another Saturday morning, me laughing and you crying," he says as he climbs in. Geryon watches him pull the blanket up to his chin, just like the old days. "Just like the old days," Geryon says too. 45. Photographs. Like and not like. It was a photograph just like the old days. Or was it? He slid off the bed quickly, thorns all around him, black and glistening, but he passed through unhurt, and out the door, pulling his overcoat around him as he went. Corridor deserted, except for a red exit sign at the end. Pressing hard on the spring bar of the door, he stepped out into a blood-colored dawn, not the parking lot. He was in the debris of the hotel garden. Ruined roses of every variety paused stiffly on their stalks. Dry blades of winter fennel clicked in the cold air and swung low over the ground, shedding feathery gold stuff. What is that smell? Geryon was thinking. And then he saw Ankash at the bottom of the garden, on a bench built into a big pine tree, sitting motionless with knees under his chin and arms folded on his knees. Eyes stayed on Geryon as he crossed the garden, hesitated, then sat down on the ground in front of the bench. "Yeah," said Geryon. Ankash regarded him silently. "Look as if you didn't sleep much," said Geryon. "Kind of cold out here, aren't you? Cold just sitting still? Maybe we could go get some breakfast. Or just walk downtown. Sure would like some coffee." Geryon studied the ground in front of him for a while, drew a small diagram in the dirt with his finger. Looked up. His eyes met Ankash's eyes, and they both rose at once, and Ankash hit Geryon as hard as he could across the face with the flat of his hand. Geryon stumbled backwards, and Ankash hit him again with the other hand, knocking Geryon to his knees. "He's ambidextrous," thought Geryon with admiration as he scrambled to his feet, swinging wildly. He would have landed a punch on the pine tree and broken his hand had Ankash not caught him. They swayed together and balanced. Then Ankash unlaced his arms and stood back. With the front of his shirt, he wiped snot and blood from Geryon's face. "Sit," he said, pushing Geryon to the bench. "Put your head back." Geryon sat and leaned his head against the trunk of the tree. "Don't swallow," said Ankash. Geryon stared up through pine branches at Venus. All the same, he thought, "I'd like to punch someone." "So," said Ankash, daubing at the bright purple mark on Geryon's right cheekbone. Geryon waited. You love him? Geryon thought about that. In my dreams I do. Your dreams? Dreams of the old days. When you first knew him? Yes, when I knew him. What about now? Yes, no. I don't know. Geryon pressed his hands over his face, then let them fall. No. It's not there now. They were quiet a while. Then Ankash said, So. Geryon waited. So what's it like? Ankash stopped. He began again. So, what's it like, fucking him now? Degrading, said Geryon, without a pause, and saw Ankash recoil from the word. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, said Geryon, but Ankash was gone across the garden. At the door he turned. Geryon? Yes? There is one thing I want from you. Tell me. Want to see you use those wings. A silence tossed itself across the tall gold heads of the fennel stalks between them. Into this silence burst Herakles. Conchitas! He cried, stepping out the exit door. Buen dia! Then he saw Ankash's face, and looked toward Geryon and paused. Ah, he said. Geryon was groping in the bottom of his huge coat pocket. Ankash pushed past Herakles, vanished into the hotel. Herakles looked at Geryon. Volcano time? He said. In the photograph, the face of Herakles is white. It is the face of an old man. It is a photograph of the future, thought Geryon, months later when he was standing in his darkroom, looking down at the acid bath and watching likeness come groping out of the bones. 46. Photographs. Number 1748. It is a photograph he never took. No one here took it. Geryon is standing beside the bed in his overcoat, watching Ankash struggle awake. He has the tape recorder in hand. When he sees Ankash's eyes open, he says, How long are the batteries good for? About 3 hours. Ankash answers, sleepily from the pillow. Why, what are you up to? What time is it anyway? About 4:30, says Geryon. Go back to sleep. Ankash mumbles a word and slides back under his dream. Want to give you something to remember me by, whispers Geryon, closing the door. He has not flown for years, but why not be a black speck raking its way toward the crater of Ichanticas on icy possibles? Why not rotate the inhuman Andes at a personal angle, and retreat when it spins, if it does, and if not, wind bolts of wind like slaps of wood, and the bitter red drumming of wing muscle on air. He flicks record. This is for Ankash, he calls to the earth, diminishing below. This is a memory of our beauty. He peers down at the earth heart of Ichanticas, dumping all its photons out her ancient eye, and he smiles for the camera. The only secret people keep. 47. The flashes in which a man possesses himself. Flour powders the air around them and settles on their arms and eyes and hair. One man shapes the dough. The other two shovel it on long handles into a square hole filled with flames cut into the back wall. Herakles and Ancash and Geryon have stopped outside the bakery to stare at the hole of fire. After quarreling all day, they went out to walk the dark streets of Juku. It is a starless, windless midnight. Cold drifts up from the ancient rocks below. Geryon walks behind the others. Little spurts of acid keep filling his mouth from 2 red pepper tamales eaten fast a few hours ago. They are following the palisade. Pass down an alley, then turn a corner, and there it is. Volcano in a wall. "Do you see that?" says Ancash. "Beautiful." Herakles breathes out. He is looking at the men. "I mean the fire," says Ancash. Herakles grins in the dark. Ancash watches the flames. "We are amazing beings," Geryon is thinking. "We are neighbors of fire." And now time is rushing towards them, where they stand side by side with arms touching, immortality on their faces, night at their back. Interview. Stesikoros. Interviewer. One critic speaks of a sort of concealment drama going on in your work, some special interest in finding out what or how people act when they know that important information is being withheld. This might have to do with an aesthetic of blindness, or even a will to blindness if that is not tautology. Stesikoros. I will tell about blindness. Interviewer. Yes, do. Stesikoros. First I must tell about seeing. Interviewer. Fine. Stesikoros. Up to 1907 I was seriously interested in seeing. I studied and practiced it. I enjoyed it. Interviewer. 1907. Stesikoros. I will tell about 1907. Interviewer. Please. Stesikoros. First I must tell about what I saw. Interviewer. Okay. Stesikoros. Paintings completely covered the walls right up to the ceiling. At the time the atelier was lit by gas fixtures, and it glowed like a dogma, but this is not what I saw. Interviewer. No. Stesikoros. Naturally, I saw what I saw. Interviewer. Naturally. Stesikoros. I saw everything everyone saw. Interviewer. Well, yes. Stesikoros. No, I mean everything everyone saw. Everyone saw because I saw it. Interviewer. Did they? Stesikoros. I was, very simply, in charge of seeing for the world. After all, seeing is just a substance. Interviewer. How do you know that? Stesikoros. I saw it. Interviewer. Where? Stesikoros. Wherever I looked, it poured out my eyes. I was responsible for everyone's visibility. It was a great pleasure. It increased daily. Interviewer. A pleasure, you say? Stesikoros. Of course it had its disagreeable side. I could not blink, or the world went blind. Interviewer. So no blinking. Stesikoros. No blinking from 1907 on. Interviewer. Until? Stesikoros. Until the start of the war. Then I forgot. Interviewer. And the world? Stesikoros. The world went ahead much as before. Let's talk about something else now. Interviewer. Description. Can we talk about description? Stesikoros. What is the difference between a volcano and a guinea pig? Is not a description. Why is it like it is a description. Interviewer: I take it you are speaking formally. What about content? Stesichoros: No difference. Interview: How about your little hero, Geryon? Stesichoros: Exactly. It is red that I like, and there is a link between geology and character. Interviewer: What is this link? Stesichoros: I have often wondered. Interviewer: Identity, memory, eternity, your constant themes. Stesichoros: And how can regret be red? And might it be? Interviewer: Which brings us to Helen. Stesichoros: There is no Helen. Interviewer: I believe our time is up. Stesichoros: Thank you for this and for everything. Interviewer: It is I who thank you. Stesichoros: So glad you didn't ask about the little red dog. Interviewer: Next time. Stesichoros: That's 3.